First of all, let me get something straight. This is a journal, not a Diary of a Wimpy Kid is perhaps the most popular book series of all time. That's not true. Most popular amongst boys aged 7 to 13 between the years of 2010 and 2016. I'm still impressed. It's amazing how much I loved this series as a kid despite initially wanting nothing to do with it. The trailer for the books would always play on my TV with awful tweened animation and a really obnoxious theme song. I don't know why this made me so mad as a child. Funnily enough, my first experience with the series actually came from the 2010, well, hit film in my heart at least. I feel like every kid saw this movie when it came out, but from looking at the box office, it just statistically can't be possible. I loved this movie. The cheese touch game became a common occurrence in schools across the globe for many years to come. I loved it so much that when my grandmother gifted me a copy of the book that she got for free by buying a newspaper, I put it under my bed and never looked at it for like a year. Yeah, one day I must have been super bored because I decided to read. I picked it up again and ended up reading through the whole thing in a single night. It was great. I bought the like 6 books that came next and sped through those, got a couple more each year they released, and then, well, kinda gave up when I got into high school. But they still hold an incredibly special place in my heart. Apparently many others' hearts too, as these books were everywhere. I did not know a single boy in my class who didn't have at least one of these things or saw the eventual sequels to the film. And then the threequel. If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you'd already know that I hold these films in high regard. These ones not so much. These aren't just good kids movies. They're good comedy movies, and I think that's why they've stood the test of time compared to whatever this was.
Congrats, Diaper Hands. You've gone viral.
Kill me. The newer Disney Plus movies also tend to fumble a bag as well, mostly being safe, bland retellings of the books with questionable visuals. Why is Greg bald? Really, other than childhood nostalgia, I seriously started questioning the actual quality of these books in the first place. How are they from a non-kid's point of view? Was there a moment where that quality started to dip? Do I only like this franchise so much because of the movies? And so to answer this ever-longing question, I decided to just bite the bullet. Sit down and read all 1, 2, 3, 4, Jesus, 23 books in this series, including the strange spin-off stuff, because why not? Oh boy, I sure can't wait to read Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid starring Rowley. That always works. And so without further ado, let's begin. As a kid, I read through everything until quitting halfway through Old School, so I'm interested to see what I remember and where this franchise eventually heads to. I'm sorry if this turns negative, Jeff Kenny. I love your work. Thanks for letting me interview you for my podcast last year. Let's begin. It's time for the epic tale that started it all. It's Greg Heffley's adventure into becoming a little less of an asshole, because then we wouldn't have a series, would we? Ah yes, the true hero's journey. Author Jeff Kinney wrote this book back in 2007, becoming a near-instant hit, launching him and his character into stardom. Which is interesting, as from my talk with him, it always seemed like the first entry was something he was almost embarrassed by, feeling as if he didn't properly get a grasp on forming a standard narrative until 11 books in. But given how massive they still were even before then, clearly something else stuck out to folks about the series that had nothing to do with it being an emotional roller coaster or anything. Although I've really done myself a disservice here by watching the movie so many times. That is just one of those movies I could put on at any point in the day and have a good time. So a lot of me reading this is just realizing how much the movie changed stuff around, or when gags from this one would wind up in later movies. But that is not to talk down on this thing at all, because if there's one thing I can say about this first Wimpy Kid book, it's that it's really genuinely funny, which more than makes up for the fact that nothing happens in it at all. Obviously that should go without saying, but I definitely know as the series goes on, Jeff becomes an author more experienced with having things like a plot. You know, if you came to Diary of a Wimpy Kid for a gripping story, well, first of all, why? But this is treated more like you're simply reading a couple excerpts from an actual 12-year-old's personal diary. Just reading a highlight reel for Greg's first year of middle school, cutting between various situations he finds himself in with a slight overarching theme of him learning not to be such a dickhead. I think the first page of this book is genius on such a simple level. It immediately lets you know just how much of an egotistical prick Greg is, opening with him bragging that he's only making the diary in the first place so he wouldn't have to repeat himself when he's rich and famous. That's really the strongest thing about this book. Greg sells it point blank, his dead, vacant stare becoming a cultural icon. What's he thinking? If Greg wasn't so extreme in his unlikability, there's no way the franchise would be where it is today. Again, this book is nothing but small anecdotes about Greg doing such exciting things as picking where he wants to sit in class, or breaking his friend's arm. Okay, that one was pretty bad. Some of his crazy ideas are just so dumb that you can't help but laugh. They're all clearly not things he actually believes, but acts like he does when it would benefit him specifically. Like when he laments about how things would be so much simpler if school grades weren't based on age, but height. Only because he knows it's something he would stand to gain from. You wanna know what makes his assholishness even better? Some poor 70-year-old man who has no idea what Zooey Mama means had to sit down and read out all of this kid lingo for the audiobooks. And it is just as fantastic as it sounds.
Your mother slipped on a banana peel, and P.S. she is dead. And Timmy says, Zooey Mama. Girls rule!
Everything being from Greg's point of view certainly does disservice to the rest of the cast though, who are also equally entertaining yet get zero time to shine. Like, I did not realize how Rodrick only appears in this thing for like 10 pages total. It's kinda crazy. Much like the film, this thing is mainly about the relationship between Greg and his best buddy Rowley. If you've seen the movie, you know how this goes. We see Greg be an absolute unholy prick to this guy he calls his friend, yet at the same time also thinks he should have ditched him by now. He sees their friendship as him taking Rowley under his wing. That's literally how he describes it. I say it's mainly about that though, because it really only comes into play during the last 40 or so pages out of this 217-page book. For the last 3 quarters, we're really just seeing Greg do shitty thing after shitty thing and constantly trying to explain why his actions were justified, as Rowley just kinda sits off in the corner. You don't really get the idea that that's what the central conflict is until it's way too late in my opinion. Something that, again, I think the film succeeds at much more because of their foresight to focus the entire thing on Greg and Rowley. You know, everything centers on their dynamic. That is a negative, but don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm missing it or anything, because I can't believe it's taken me until rereading it all these years later, but Jeff Kinney is really funny. Like, I wasn't expecting to laugh as much as I did reading this again. It's so fast-paced. Being over the age of 14, I can read through a single page in 0.5 seconds, but because of that, it's way easier for me to be caught off guard with something like Rodrick's apology to women. It's undoubtedly enhanced by the artwork, which is just hilarious on its own with or without context. There is something I admire greatly in Jeff Kinney's art style. He somehow mastered the art of making something incredibly ugly and crappy, yet it's brilliant, iconic even. You could tell art was not his forte, apparent by some of these poses, but it almost works in its favor. There's something about reading Greg's insane egocentric ramblings going on, ranting about how much he fucking hates his friend. And then they cut to a picture of him and it's just, Greg here is exiting the yearly school play with his disappointed family as, minutes ago there, among the rest of the town, bear witness to him monumentally disrupt the performance by refusing to say his lines and then throwing apples at the lead actress. This is the exact face I would have made too. He gets Rowley fired from his job on safety patrol by terrorizing the toddlers and blaming it on him. He starts to feel guilty before a talk with his mom makes him realize that he needs to do the right thing here, which he genuinely thinks is letting Rowley take the heat for it. And then as the cherry on top, to celebrate this, his mom unknowingly takes him out for ice cream. It's amazing. He wants the position of school treasurer so he can use the money and power to win over girls, and so to ensure his victory, he makes a smear campaign on the only other candidate, hangs it up around the school. The principal then forces him to take it all down, and so he just quits, he just doesn't even care about it. On to the next popularity scheme, this subplot lasted all of 2 pages. Also, he can rise the ranks of a fictional popularity chart that he himself made up, which the movie also handles better. Sorry, I'll stop. I honestly thought I'd have more to say about this book, but I really don't. Most of my notes just consisted of writing down a joke along with the words, funny. I mean, I agree, but ultimately, I think that goes to show how successful this book was at doing what it sets out to do. Being a simple, fun book looking into the life of a kid learning to not be such a jerk to the people around him. Kids are stereotypically known for being very me, and so I think reading a book like this that consistently shows why that mindset is not going to help you make a meaningful connection in your life is an important message for the demographic this is aiming towards. The later books often feel like the idea comes from what new scenario you can put the character in, like, whoa, what if Greg and his family go on a vacation? What if Greg joins his brother's band? They go on vacation yet? And so having this one be devoid of any gimmick, focusing solely on showcasing why Greg is such a likable anti-hero, was super smart in getting audiences attached to him, even if unintentionally. Saying all this though, I can completely see why I ended up hating the Disney Plus adaptation so much. The way this story is told can only be done through a book, given its more loose structure. And so the CGI movie trying to stay so close to it throughout is without a doubt what resulted in it feeling so bland and boring, and why the movie decided to go for such a vastly different tone and pace. I'm glad to say though that this first book was still a joy to read. Diary of Wimpy Kid has hit the ground running, Jeff Kinney knocks it out of the park on his first try, and kids around the globe were eager to see where Greg Heffley could go from here. Wouldn't have to wait long for that, as Diary of a Wimpy Kid Rodrick Rules would release the following year. Now, this is the one I remember everybody having. Again, partially thanks to the movie. Devin Bostic was such a good pick for Rodrick that he became the character. Something that can be said for any of the cast, really. But Rodrick is without a doubt the standout, becoming the metaphorical cool older brother for kids around the globe. And so a book focused on him, someone who got little to no attention in the first one, seems like a perfect idea. Is what I would be saying if I didn't just remember that for a majority of these books, the title is just something to make it stand apart from the last one. As yet again, Rodrick is the focus of this thing for like a quarter of the pages, if even. For the most part, Rodrick Rules comes off more like an expansion of the first. It's still just various tales of Greg getting into mischief and giving anecdotes about his new year in middle school. Just so happens that a few more of these stories involve his brother. Well, there you go, slap his name on the title. It's weird, I oftentimes see folks regard this as the best Wimpy Kid book of all, and I can't help but wonder if a part of that is artificially elevated because the movie adaptation is considered to be the best one in the series, and quite possibly the greatest piece of fiction ever told. Look, I don't make up the rules, it's not my fault it's on the Criterion Collection. You think someone would just Photoshop that? When I see people talk about this book, it comes off like they're describing some heartfelt story about brotherly bonding, exploring how and why Greg and Rodrick are constantly at odds with each other, before starting to come to the other's level and grow a mutual respect for one another. But no, that's just a fucking movie. Maybe it just has to do with it being blue. What can I say? It's a fine looking book. Sorry I keep bringing up the films, I know I should be judging these on their own merit, and thankfully 19 out of the 23 books I'm looking at today don't have movies to compare to. But it really is hard not to read this thing and realize how impressive it was to take most of these disparate anecdotes and combine them all in a single narrative. Whereas the book will bring up plot points of Rodrick throwing a party, Greg taking part in a talent show with Rowley, going to his granddad's retirement home, trying to briefly impress a girl called Holly Hills, and it treats these as all separate occurrences. Where the movie will instead combine all of this into a flowing story, everything feeding into each other. You know, Greg and Rodrick throw a party together, Greg accidentally rats out his brother right when they were starting to grow on each other, resulting in Rodrick getting banned from doing the talent show and being pissed enough at Greg to try and humiliate him at the retirement home in front of Holly. It's all blended in. I love these movies because you're watching all these different threads start up for usually selfish reasons, and watching horror as they all start to collide. Greg's tangled web of lies catching up to him. Where the movie will have a bonding moment of the two going out and terrorizing the locals, the book will use that exact same situation, but instead as a way of pointing out how unlike his brother Greg is, much preferring to play a nice old game of D&D. It's funny and it works, but that's all it is. I find the films do a much better job at lifting up the source material. When all these plot threads work together, it becomes greater than the sum of its parts, you know? And I think that's the best way I could compare the Wimpy Kid books to the movies. Look at me, I'm dissecting the narrative flow of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Look, I'm just saying, it's kinda hard to read this at times and not think about how much better it could have been with a couple minor differences. Kill me. Once again, that is not to discredit this book at all, because at the end of the day, I find it to be a worthy successor to the original. And in a lot of ways, it is better. Despite what I said earlier, I can see Jeff Kinney trying more here to make his story more prominent and clear. Not feeling as if it finally decided what it wanted to be 30 pages before it ending. Nah, Rodrick is a pretty consistent theme throughout the whole thing, at least way more than Rowley was in the first one, even if he isn't always necessarily a part of the story. There's a lot of funny stuff here with him that showcases why he's such a fan-favorite character. Although, ironically, the funniest moments once again go to Greg. Now that the story isn't focused on him changing as a character at all, it allows them to just make him an asshole again, and we're meant to just act like that development from the first one didn't happen. That is not a complaint, I am all for it. I couldn't imagine Greg if he weren't eating the souls of those around him. Like, a big turning point in the first book was him taking the heat for getting that cheese touch to make it up to Rowley. However, this book opens with him getting into his new year's school. He realizes he still has the cheese touch, and so he just walks over and gives it to a new kid. Perfect. His prickery is up to a lot here. It's way more overtly comedic without even attempting to tell a message, and I love it. Everything somehow comes around to benefit him. He could get away with murder if he wanted to. Like when his mom tells him to be more truthful and stop lying, and so he uses it to say whatever he wants without getting in trouble. Or when he wants to create the next big school joke, and so he pretends his classmate Shrag Gupta is invisible. This goes on for weeks, and the poor kid can't do anything about it. He tells the principal he thinks it's a different kid they're ignoring, and so makes Greg apologize to some rando, ready to leave the room and get back to isolating his friends. By the time the kid tells his dad and he has to really apologize, the kid is so desperate for friends that he brings Greg in for snacks and video games, and so Greg forgives Shrag for telling on him. Book Greg is way more unlikable, and I'm all for it. This has caused an uptick in people trying to claim that Greg is a sociopath, correlating every single trait of one to at least a dozen instances of Greg expressing similar patterns. This got so big for a while, especially due to the now-deleted video essay by Mumpy Jones and Bernie Vids. So much so that it actually seemed to get Jeff Kinney a bit down when he was asked about it. So I asked him about it, of course. Obviously, nobody actually thinks Greg is a sociopath, it's just kind of a joke. Of course, being a piece of fiction, Greg just exhibits realistic traits most kids have that are then exaggerated for comedy. Comes together to paint a picture of a pretty shitty kid, but at the same time, I love Greg so much, and I think that so many people find him endearing because he is so relatable. I can remember finding myself having a lot of the same thought processes as a kid, whether it be all his get-rich-quick schemes or feeling as if nobody really understands them. I think most kids go through that phase, and it's so funny to read a story in which that kid is the protagonist. We're seeing him constantly act in his intrusive thoughts, and so you're constantly cringing at what he's doing, but at the same time, I could see myself in similar situations when I was younger. Oh god, what does that say about me? I do feel a bit bad for Jeff though. It mustn't be nice to see your character, someone meant to represent you in a way, be given such a harsh label, but Jeff, if you're watching this, I assure you, people would have it no other way. Anyways, I find the ending to this book pretty weak, at least compared to the first one. Well, and the movie. Greg doesn't even get in the talent show. Rowley breaks his leg, so he can't do it either. Rodrick and his band play but unceremoniously lose. And so Rodrick shares around Greg's big secret he's been building up to throughout the whole story. That one time at their granddad's retirement home, he got locked inside the women's bathroom. Ooh, embarrassing. Doesn't even matter because everybody misunderstands the story and thinks that Greg snuck into the high school girl's locker room somehow, and now they treat him like some perverted god. Rodrick is instead the one who gets humiliated, after his band video goes viral because his mom was dancing in the background. And so to help him out, Greg finishes his science project that he had to do. All of this happens within the span of like 10 pages. It's just so unfocused. I think he realized that the book is all about Rodrick, but nothing actually involving him or Greg is really going on here. If there's one thing I can at least give the Disney Plus version of this one, is that they try to create a more hostile dynamic with Greg and Rodrick. Greg getting good at playing the drums and slowly taking over his brother's position in the band. Still not great though. Story aside, however, I'm still pretty torn on whether or not I prefer this one to the original. I think for now, I'm gonna say I prefer the first book just for being so much tighter. It's a lot more focused than this one, which is just all over the place. And while they're both very funny, more moments from the previous one stick out in my mind. Sorry, Rodrick fans, it's not looking good. Oh boy, I really can't wait to see where the plot goes from here. At this point, the titles are just out of obligation. Just what does the last straw mean in terms of this story? I don't know. This one is an interesting case considering they just skipped right past it in terms of movie adaptations. Both times. Once you read it though, it makes a lot of sense. Rodrick Rules and Dog Days have way more clear gimmicks, that being Rodrick and the summer, whereas The Last Straw just has Greg Heffley standing in his underwear. I mean, I guess someone liked it because they just put it in the second movie. Yeah, I guess because of this lack of identity, they just took elements and story beats from this one and spread it amongst the second and third film. Like I said, the Greg underwear scene was used for Rodrick Rules along with the church shit scene. Really took reading that aloud to realize this is what I'm doing with my life. Both the movie versions take various elements from this, like the country club thing starting here, Holly Hills is way more prominent, with a good chunk of this book being devoted to Greg's hopeless attempts at winning her heart. If there's one thing I was able to recognize when reading these though, was just how much more the films lean into the cringe factor of it all. Like here, the church scene's humiliation for Greg doesn't go beyond the time seeing him wear his mom's sweater around his waist. Whereas in the movie, you have to sit there in this extremely uncomfortable and awkward scene of Rodrick exposing the shit stain to the entire town, before Greg proceeds to lick it in front of everyone because it wasn't shit, it was chocolate. I remember whenever I was a dumb kid, I genuinely thought they would make a standalone movie for every Wimpy Kid book. Looking forward to a 25-year-old Greg Heffley still in middle school. Wait, why is Rowley the same age? The main threat from Dog Days was also barred from The Last Straw, with the central conflict here being between Greg and his father, with the looming threat of his dad sending him off to military school for being such a wimpy kid. Wait a minute. And so most of this is seeing him set up various schemes to get Frank off his back, like joining the soccer team or going to Scouts. You can also really tell Jeff is trying to improve his writing by this point because there are setups galore. The family part at the end is set up at the beginning. They establish the military kid's rivalry with his dad, among way more. And while at times it does get pretty obvious when stuff is gonna come back later, I actually think this further helps it feel like an average year of Greg's life, with plot threads being picked up and forgotten about for a while before coming back to it at random points. Again though, not what we're here for. At this rate, most of us just want to see what hijinks Greg is going to get up to this time. And while overall his dickishness has been toned down, there are select moments that showcase that side of him that we just love to hit. And because of that, I want to start up a new segment we'll keep track of until the end of the video called, What Shitty Thing Has Greg Done in This Book? where I shall handpick the worst thing Greg subjects the people around him to. And by the end of this video, we'll be able to definitively figure out what the extent of this demon's torture is. In this book, I'd have to go with what he does to Rowley's parents. Greg thinks that if he practices jumping out of a dirt hole in the ground, he can train himself to jump higher, and so wants to dig a hole in Rowley's garden and cover it with a blanket so nobody can see it. You can already tell the dilemma here. Of course, one of his parents could possibly fall down this hole and severely injure themselves. And while Greg doesn't go through with this plan, he makes it clear he was more than willing to sacrifice them for a couple extra inches. Disgusting. It's a shame, I actually think this is the weakest of the books so far. Not that it's bad, honestly, the quality difference between all these are microscopic in the grand scheme of things. If there's one thing I can give Jeff Kinney, it's consistency. But it's one that I think gets actively worse once the plot kicks in halfway through. The threat of military school doesn't even seem that dire. Greg just gives up on trying at a certain point and accepts his fate. It's a little lackluster, I gotta say. I was enjoying this way more when it stuck to the life stories and flashbacks that it started with, such as Greg explaining his childhood fear of the author of the book The Giving Tree. He explains how horrifying he looked, that he should not be writing kids' books, and that to ensure he didn't get out of bed at night, his dad would tell him the author was standing in the hallway. Already, that is pretty fucked up and funny, especially with the crappy character to go along with it. But then you look up an actual picture of the guy and... yeah! He's fucking right! More highlights were Greg forcing Rowley to give him a piggyback ride all the way home from school, and when he sees that Holly has given his friend a nice note in their yearbook, and so he goes and signs hers on behalf of Rowley, telling her that he's not interested. Fantastic. The book ends on a more standard note, the others just kinda end, whereas this tries to give us a more happy ending for Greg, with him striking out with Holly but finding a new opportunity for love when he meets this new girl, Trista, of whom he wants to spend the summer taken to the country club on Rowley's parents' dollar, of course. Overall, I just find that the last straw lacks focus, which might have worked out fine the first couple times, but now that they're trying to follow along a consistent narrative, it results in you not even really knowing what it's about. Nothing has enough focus. It spends just as much time with Greg's dad as it does Holly, yet neither of them conclude in a satisfying way. So all you're left with are a bunch of good and iconic moments, yeah, sure, but moments that have since been stripped of the book and used for other, better material. Like, how would they even describe this book? What would the blurb say? Oh yeah, I own it. Let's face it, Greg Heffley will never change his wimpy ways. Someone just needs to explain that to Greg's father. You see, Frank Heffley actually thinks he can get his son to toughen up, and he enlists Greg in organized sports and other manly endeavors. Of course, Greg is easily able to sidestep his father's efforts to change him, but when Greg's dad threatens to send him off to military academy, Greg realizes he has to shape up or get shipped out. Well, okay, that's accurate, but at the end of the day, The Last Straw is another solid addition to the Wimpy Kid library. But its contents will escape my mind in 10 seconds. Boy, I'm just not looking forward to the point where all these books just start fucking blending together. They all look and feel the exact same. This is going to get mind-numbing. Wait, what are we talking about? Gonna be honest, I don't exactly know why I put this one here, but fuck it. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid Do-It-Yourself book puts every kid in the shoes of Greg Heffley. That's something people wanted for some reason. Giving them their very own diary/activity book. Basically just asks you questions and wants you to write down answers or draw a picture, basic stuff. You ever want to be an author? Do one of these. I always find it amusing when series would revolve themselves around a loser character, but because of marketing they have to be like, wow, don't you want to be like that kid? Don't you want your very own diary? The thing Greg constantly expresses is so uncool. I guess the answer was yes, because I asked for one for Christmas and filled it to the brim. This is where I would love to pull it out and show it off for the class to see, but unfortunately I have no idea where I put it, and believe me, that was on purpose. Okay, this requires a bit of an explanation, but when I was a kid, I was really afraid of the Teals doll, that creepypasta from Sonic R. Splash Dash viewers, treat this as an extension onto that video. I would have nightmares every night about the Teals doll. One of them prominently taking inspiration from the Sonic Shorts animation. I'm looking at it now and I don't know why, but I always envisioned him having a noose around his neck. Or maybe a piece of fan art I saw made me think that because of his tilted head, perhaps? Or I don't know, either way. The visual of this character with a noose around their neck clearly stuck out to me, because I'd always have dreams of the Teals doll hanging me. I think I would have been like 8 years old. We're really learning a lot about me today, aren't we? The Wimpy Kid Do-It-Yourself book had a section where it wanted you to draw your nightmare, with a picture of Greg parachuting onto a tarantula farm, which honestly might be more terrifying. But one day I came home from school and saw my diary sitting on the couch in my living room, open on a drawing of a Diary of Wimpy Kid version of myself being hung by the Teals doll. I just did what I was asked. I think my mom wanted to ask me if I had issues but got distracted by something else and never brought it up, so I hid the diary somewhere and never find it since. Thanks, Jeff Kinney. If I could possibly try to redraw what this picture looked like, this is the best I could do. Lovely. Dog Days is like a better version of The Last Straw in every single way. I understand why they skipped straight to it for the third movie. Not only is it funnier, but surprisingly, things happen. It's not the greatest story ever told, just more relationship issues between Greg and Riley with more of Frank sprinkled through it. But it's something. And the weirdest thing is, so much of this one is retreading on stuff from The Last Straw, just done better so I can't even be mad. We pick up right where we left off, which I was not expecting. Finally, we're getting the Wimpy Kid lore. Apparently, the second after they took Trista to the country club, she got picked up by the lifeguard and left these two bozos without a second thought. Nice guys really do finish last. Wait, he's not nice at all. Doesn't even matter, he's completely moved on now to trying to get with, get this, not Holly Hills, but Heather Hills, her older sister. I think she might be a little bit out of your league, Greg. Most of this book is yet again Greg just being shitty to Rowley. Except this time it expands to the whole Jefferson family. I'm glad I've introduced keeping track of the worst thing Greg has ever done in each book, because this one is gonna be a goddamn list, there's too many to count. So Greg wraps up a nearly $100 bill for his buddy's parents by buying so many smoothies at the country club, using Mr. Jefferson's account number and footing him with the bill. And so a lot of the first half here is him trying various schemes to rack up the needed cash. One of these involves starting a lawnmower company where they force the old lady to pick them up and drop them off. They don't even have any lawn care equipment. And then they refuse to cut the grass within a 10-foot radius of dog shit. Wonderful. On top of all that, he tries to put this task squarely onto Riley's shoulders, wanting to sit back, relax, and rake in the cash. However, interestingly, Riley has started to gain self-respect. I'm proud of you. Similarly to the first book, Riley does not simply forget about these aggressions. And so Greg learns like 80 pages in that Riley has quietly cut off their friendship without even telling him. Damn, good for him. This doesn't even bother Greg though, he just moves on to the rest of his summer schemes. Such as getting a dog.
Get the fuck out of here.
After Frank learns that his dad ran over his childhood pet and never told him, and so we're introduced to Sweetie, who will be gone by the end of the book. Don't get used to him. One of the worst things Greg does, however, comes when he and Riley's parents try to mend their relationship, inviting Greg out to the beach with them for a vacation, in which he gets so frustrated at how nice, polite, and loving they are, that he sneaks downstairs in the middle of the night, grabs Mr. Jefferson's laptop, and then emails his mum through the guy's account, telling her that they're all crazy and that they need to come and pick him up. Wow, what an asshole. There is nobody else who faces the brunt of Greg's shittiness more than Riley's poor, innocent father. That guy needs a GoFundMe, I donate. I could go on. He tries to steal from the church donation box, calls the police on his dad, but if there were one thing I could mark as being Greg's most evil action in Dog Days, it's when he specifically prays to God in the hopes of asking him to injure Riley's father. What do you have against this man? I don't know, him praying to a higher power just to express his wish for harming another human? That kinda takes the cake in my eyes. That's some Spider-Man 3 shit right there.
I want you to kill
Rowley's dad.
By the end of the book, I was shocked to see that they started bringing back the military school thread after he continues to disappoint his dad. Did a good job at reminding me that this still takes place right after The Last Straw. Although it's yet again an empty thread, as all Frank does in reality is gets rid of the dog. Yeah, that'll show Greg. Still ends on a nice moment between them, but it's similar to Rodrick Rules in that it does feel like it comes out of nowhere a bit. Him and his dad realizing that, while they may not always see eye to eye, it doesn't mean they don't care for each other. Aww. Despite not offering much story-wise, I think I enjoyed Dog Days way more than The Last Straw and Rodrick Rules. Mainly for just being funnier, their fucking lawn care sign is great, there are so many perfect out-of-context frames like... And this is the book to grace us with that ever-classic meme. Good one, Manny! I get a lot of Greg's frustrations here, there's a lot of stuff here I related to. I didn't get a bizarre ladybug phone that can only call home or the police, but I do remember whenever I was a kid and wanted a phone, my parents got me this awful dinky Samsung flip phone that could barely take a picture, never mind use the internet. And nothing made my blood boil more than when Susan ruins Greg's birthday party, and so to make it up to him, she takes him to the store to get a gift. but then also says Rodrick and Manny can get a gift too, even though it was Greg's birthday. Sorry, I got carried away for a second. Fucking asshole. If there's one critique I could give this one, it's the sense that Jeff is already kind of running out of unique scenarios to put Greg and these characters in. Like, I could have sworn they've told this fucking Freddy joke with this exact same drawing like 3 times now. But honestly, other than that, I thought Dog Days was wonderful. Might be my favorite so far, honestly. God, I haven't even taken that into account, what the fan favorite Wimpy Kid books are. Do people have opinions on this? Should I be worried? Do I need to barricade my doors and windows? Whoa. How Greg Heffley went Hollywood. Mainly focusing on the first, but also including short little segments about both sequels. Offering a lot of behind-the-scenes info, history into the actors, and how Jeff Kennedy came up with the series in the first place. I'm not going to sit here and review a book like this or anything, but I guess as someone who seriously loves all 3 of these films, this was a genuine joy to look through. There were so many fun tidbits and questions I'd always ask myself while watching them that were finally answered here. If only I had this book as a 10-year-old. As a kid, we were doing like show and tell or something where we all had to take in a book we liked. And like 80% of the class took in their Wimpy Kid novels, gawking at each other's collections. Until one kid stood up and proudly displayed his Wimpy Kid movie diary. Then and there, everyone wanted to be him. We were so jealous. Fuck you, Justin. It was really cool seeing so much detail about the behind the scenes. Like different ideas they had for an adaptation altogether, such as having Greg be the only animated character in the world or have Greg be played by an adult. Yeah, that would have gone over well, just as Fairly Odd Parents. We get a lot of Jeff's insight on how the movie would have been different to the books, even pointing out one of my favorite details, being that you can excuse them both being so different because the book is entirely from Greg's point of view, whereas the movies are just the truth, these events as they happened. Like in Greg's diary version of the school play, he hits Patty in the head with an apple. However, in the movie, she catches that shit and throws it right back at him. He's an unreliable narrator, and it's why I love the contrast between the two so much. One detail they talk about that I never realized was how Greg's clothes look so awkward throughout the film because they're slightly too tight for him, showing how as a middle child he was just given Rodrick's hand-me-downs. Whereas Manny is always wearing the fucking coolest, freshest shit any 2-year-old could. Showing how much more favored he is to Greg, his Halloween costume is even a better version of his older brother's. That's really clever. Glad to see he also wanted to put a large focus on making sure this world was timeless. Being a movie you can watch at any point in the future without it feeling dated, which, again, is a wild contrast to... You even get to see some of the storyboards. I really hope we get to see more of this someday. There's behind-the-scenes info on the 3D animations they made for the film. They go into how older Greg looked by the end of the trilogy. If you're a fan of these movies at all, I would highly recommend checking this out. I really loved it. God, I want to watch the movie again. Gotta say, out of all the covers we've had so far, The Ugly Truth just might be my favorite. Not only do we get this sleek, dark purple color, but I just really like this expressionless drawing of Greg sitting on a stump staring at an egg. There's something so melancholy about it. Which is fitting if you were wondering what said Ugly Truth were, it doesn't take us long to find out. This is gonna be a book all about puberty. Yeah. It's been almost 3 weeks since Rowley stopped being Greg's friend after everything that transpired by the end of Dog Days, and school is starting up again. Big problem though. Greg is now friendless. How could Rowley do such a thing? There's an ongoing theme throughout this one of Greg needing to learn how to be more responsible and think more about his future and how he wants it to be. Which obviously isn't a worry for him, he thinks he's gonna be the next fucking Elon Musk. Okay, that would fit, right? Whether it be him auditioning to play a children's ice cream mascot, pulling the fire alarm at school and being too much of a bitch to own up to it, or expecting his dad to literally baby him for his entire life, going so far as to hoping he would call him every single day for the rest of his life, just to wake him up in the morning. All of this points to Greg not wanting anything to change, which, unfortunately for him, that's what this book is all about. For example, his mom decides she's gonna go off and do something for herself and try to further her education, returning to school. Which pisses Greg off, as it means he now can't ever take care of him 24/7. But even then, when she was, he was still mad about it. You can't win with this kid. So she hires a maid to keep the house clean, but she's a massive bitch, so that goes nowhere. The looming threat of The Ugly Truth is a talk that Greg knows is coming from his grandmother pretty soon. Something he knows Rodrick also had to go through. It's fairly subtle, but I actually really love the detail here where we see 3 photos of Greg and his brothers from various points in time. If you look at his face compared to Rodrick, you can see that Greg is completely paralleling him. Starting off happy and hopeful before you watch the optimism slowly fade from his eyes. This got too real. You know what else I noticed throughout this book, though? Greg wants to fuck. He talks about girls here way more than before. He really wants to go to this cool guy's party because he knows girls will be there. He's excited to be his uncle's groomsman as it means he gets to walk a girl down the aisle. He really wants to get with his dentist, constantly maintaining eye contact with her to make sure she knows he's interested. He never fucking stops in this one. In terms of the worst thing Greg does, however, I'm shocked to see that there weren't really many standout moments here that were particularly evil. I guess our little Greg Heffley really is growing up. I mean, I guess the fire alarm thing would be considered the worst, but even then it's only relative to how tame the rest of this was. But if we aren't counting an individual act, I'd have to say the way he talks about Rowley here certainly harkens us back to the good old days of breaking his arm and insulting his dad right to his face. At the start of the book, he learns how his parents have hired a big brother to take care of him, which makes him mad. Not because his ex-friend has moved on, but instead because it meant that he could have gotten paid to hang out with Rowley all those years. That's the Greg we know and love. Sadly, the egg featured so prominently on the cover is barely a footnote in this story. He gets it for a school project, has to take care of it, but whoa, it breaks. You've seen this song and dance before. I guess it does work as a symbol for him having to grow up though. Only thing that makes me not care about that as much though is the knowledge that we've still got like 20 books left to go through, and I know damn well this asshole's not going to be changing anymore. He's gonna go right back to being a dick, again. I wonder if Jeff ever planned on any of these being the last entry before getting picked up for a bajillion more installments. I mean, realistically, they've gotta end at some point. I can't imagine they're nearly as big as they once were anymore. Would he even try to give it an ending then? Would it even matter, considering at this rate it'll probably just be rebooted 5 years later? Who knows, but I certainly wouldn't mind a finale showing us where all these characters end up in the future. Or maybe it would be better that we never find out. I mean, I'm sure we're all well aware Greg is not going to grow up to be a #1 best-selling author or a millionaire or anything. So perhaps it will be best to leave his fate open-ended, I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for when I remake my original Wimpy Kid film trilogy review, because 10 minutes was just not enough. Look, it's the Pop Tropica or whatever that thing is called, made by the same guy, wow. It's strange. Like I said, there were no real moments in this one that truly stood out to me or anything, but it all comes together at the end in a way that ties everything up in a satisfying way that leaves me liking it more than something like Last Straw, at least. After continuing to feel of being responsible, Greg finally has to talk with his grandmother, and while we don't learn what she said to him, he comes out of said experience learning that he wants to slow down and not try to grow up as fast. That he should enjoy his last couple years of just being a kid. And so he walks up to Riley's house, knocks on the door, and asks him to be friends again. It's just solid. I like The Ugly Truth a bunch. If you asked me a week from now, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you a thing about it other than the school lock-in where the teacher is getting pissed after thinking one of the kids took a picture of his ass. Don't ask, but it'll probably end up near the top of the list just for being consistent and fun. I can't believe how rapidly we were approaching the point where I stopped keeping up with this series. I can't believe it is still going to this day. This was the first Wimpy Kid book that was new by the time I got to it. I bought everything up until The Ugly Truth and eagerly awaited the rest of the year to finally get the new installment. Which I think my mom was pretty pissed at me about. These books are like barely literature, let's be real. And so on the way home I was so excited that I wanted to read at least the first couple pages. And before I knew it, I was done and we weren't even home yet. Time to wait another year for the next one. If you couldn't tell from the cover, this is a Christmas-themed adventure. With Greg lamenting how he hates the build-up to the holidays, it means he has to stay on good behavior for a whole month. Especially with his mom's Santa scout on patrol. It took me rereading this to realize that Elf on the Shelf has been around since 2005 and not just something thought up by TikTok trends. Nobody had one of these things in Ireland. And then the second a mum makes a big TikTok about it, everybody has one and would all steal each other's ideas on Facebook of what wacky scenario they can think up for their kids. At first I thought it was just a joke, but no! Greg has taken the holiday spirit to heart and is surprisingly way nicer in this one, especially to Rowley. The worst thing they do here is argue about whether or not it's called volleyball. Or volleyball. I would call that dumb, but it's a story I can sadly relate to. As a kid, I remember proudly walking into my primary school, walking up to my friends and proclaiming, "Yeah, I know what a vagina is." Thankfully, no one knew what it was either, so I couldn't be corrected. Score one for Mark. If you want an example of just how kind Greg is in this story, there's one particular moment that had my jaw dropped. So Rowley and Greg want to make some money, naturally, and so set up an event to compete with the school bazaar. Bazaar? Oh, whatever. Hanging up posters all around the place. Eventually, the rain winds up making all the ink on the paper start to drip off, resulting in the school's walls being covered in giant green blotches of ink. everyone thinking there's a vandal on the loose and even the police getting called in to figure out who's done this heinous crime. Greg plays it off pretty cool before he's called into the principal's office, where he informs our hero that he received an anonymous letter from somebody, saying the vandals were he and Greg Heffley. Except Rowley only put Greg's name on it. I feel like in any other book, Greg would, I don't know, hang Rowley up on the cross or something. I mean, isn't this extremely similar to the Safety Patrol story from the original? Rowley stopped being his friend for like 6 months because of that. Greg could shoot Rowley in the foot because of this and I'd still be on his side. But no. Showing a bit of restraint and maturity for once in his life, Greg decides he's just gonna take one for the team and clean up the property himself without making a fuss. And better yet, he doesn't use this as an excuse to boast about how kind and gracious he is. He just puts his head down and fucking does it. Bravo, Heffley. I guess we barely even see any of Rowley in Cabin Fever anyways. Greg is too preoccupied taking care of his cool virtual pet in this Flash MMO he's addicted to. Net critters.
Go to the bathroom. You're shitting yourself.
Not yet. No.
I will rip everything apart. I swear to God. Go to the bathroom!
Not yet.
You're shitting yourself!
I don't know if I just haven't been picking up on it before, but Cabin Fever came out in like 2011, I think, so I guess this sort of stuff has been rapidly rising in popularity. But this book is filled with way more hip kid lingo. Like Rowley's repeated use of the phrase, lol. Starting to remember why I begun feeling embarrassed reading these. Most of Greg's endeavors throughout the story are fueled by his obsessive need to buy things for his virtual chihuahua. Which makes sense. I recall these being all the rage whenever I was reading this. I got really into this UK exclusive online MMO called Bin Weevils. I would play that shit every day for like a year. You were a bunch of weevils in a bin, and it looked like every ugly British cartoon ever. There was barely anything you could do, but I loved it anyways. I didn't understand how servers worked at that age, and back in my day, kids didn't have no dang smartular phones. And so we'd all gather at school like, okay, at exactly 7 p.m. tonight, we all have to join the mulch server and go to this specific area in the map and call out for each other. And it just never fucking worked. I'd never find anybody. So I'd go into school the next day and they'd be like, oh, the mulch server? I thought you meant the white dog shit server. Those are real names, by the way. Bin Weevils is actually where I first heard about Fred the movie. It was coming to theaters in the UK, so I guess they wanted to do some cross-promotion. So, Cabin Fever, huh?
Oh shit, here comes Pac-Man.
I can't believe it took them this long to introduce a bully character into this world. That seems like such an obvious trope to tackle, but there's a whole segment here on it. Like Greg and Rowley having their dads go to the house of a kid who's been terrorizing them only to find out he's a literal 5-year-old. By the way, have you ever watched the bullying documentary? That shit is sad. It's like a compilation of a bunch of different kids talking about their experiences with bullying as a camera crew follows them around filming them getting bullied. There's this one kid in that I feel fucking awful for. He looks kind of like Fregley, honestly. That's not an insult, it's just the glasses. They like go to his parents' house and his dad tells him he needs to stand up for himself. His younger sister says that she gets made fun of at school because he's her brother. And he's just the most normal kid on planet Earth. Why aren't you doing anything, camera crew? At least send him to fucking Disneyland or something. There's this moment where one kid hits another, and so the other kid hits him back. Then the principal comes in and yells at the second kid, even though he was just defending himself. Then he just starts pleading to the teacher that the same kid is always picking on him, but she still makes him apologize. It's annoying. The Cabin Fever part of Cabin Fever doesn't come into play until near the ending, where the Heffleys get stuck in their house with their power out. This feels like it goes on forever until Greg finds out that none of the other houses on their block is having a power outage. Dude, I've lived in America for a year now and I'm starting to say out like a fucking Yankee. And so after sleuthing around, he finds out that Manny turned off all the power in their house, except for his own room. And then they all just move on from it. Fucking someone punt that kid, please. I hate Manny. I know that's not a unique sentiment or anything, but I do not get any enjoyment out of watching this monster take up precious page space. There is a forest worth of trees that had to be cut down just so they could print Manny Heffley on it, with his god-awful fucking crocodile mouth. Kill that thing. I can barely even think of the worst thing Greg does in Cabin Fever. I guess if I were to choose, it would have to be a story he recounts where he tries to rub a bumper sticker off his dad's new car using one of those sharp dishwashing things. What are they called? I don't care. He scratches up his dad's car, obviously, ruining the paint job, forcing him to go back and return it in exchange for a way less cool one. But even then, I can't be mad at Greg for it, because it was fucking Manny who put the bumper sticker on there in the first place. God! And with that, Cabin Fever ends with Greg Heffley getting praised by the town for his good deeds. He was doing it for money, but hey, they didn't know about that part. This was another good one. It wasn't as laugh-out-loud hilarious as some of the previous or features many iconic moments or anything. But the winter theme really does a lot in helping it stand out. I'd probably put this above The Last Straw and Ugly Truth, honestly. I liked it a lot. The third wheel opens on a disturbing sight. Greg as a fetus. Didn't you see that? Not only that, but this bullshitter starts claiming that he can vividly remember what it was like in there, recounting all these riveting tales of being a baby, with him even lamenting how he yearns to be back in his mother's womb, trying to replicate the feeling as best he can. Now you may wonder where the third wheel comes into play here. So was I. This was the first Wimpy Kid book where as a kid I was actively reading it and thinking to myself, why is it called this? I guess that's the issue Jeff was avoiding by making all the previous ones so broad in how they're presented. Otherwise, I'm just sitting there the whole time like,
when are they gonna get to the fireworks factory?
I mean, it takes us half the book here to even establish the upcoming school dance that makes him the titular third wheel. The first half seems almost entirely disconnected, jumping from Greg as a baby, their Uncle Gary, presumably divorced since the previous book, moves in with the Heffleys for a while and is a general nuisance. They remind us that Rodrick exists. Hey, and they even have their own equivalent to Skibbity Toilet. Whoa, did Wimpy Kid predict COVID? Wait, he didn't do a COVID book, did he? This is also, unfortunately, the book which Diaper Hands got its inspiration from. So you're to blame. Again, they jump from story beat to story beat so much, an issue that wasn't really prevalent with the others because of how openly they were presented. Whereas I think this, instead, is the Wimpy Kid book to take place over the shortest period of time so far, primarily being the build-up to Valentine's Day. By the last 50 or so pages, it is all Greg on said fateful night. But we'll get into that. I guess they're sticking with the arc of Greg slowly becoming a man here because so much of this book is filled with him trying to pick up a girl. But if there being more boys than girls in their school, the pressure is on to not go as a girlfriend-free boy. Maybe them focusing so much on baby Greg was their way of contrasting that, to show how much harder his life is now that he actually has to consider all this stuff. Not even his amazing Valentine's Day cards are enough to convince the women of this school to give him a chance. Dear Adrian, it would be sweet if you'd go with me to the Valentine's Day dance. Signed, Greg Heffley. P.S. If the answer is no, please hand this to Julia Barrows, who is 2 seats to your left. He fumbles the bag so often in this one, it's atrocious. Most of these are completely on him. He decides that he's gonna babysit the toddler of one of his parents' friends just to try and impress the kid's older sister. He then proceeds to get locked out as the kid rides his bike through the house, destroying everything. Greg then finally manages to get back in by sneaking into the older sister's room. And then he just fucking sleeps in her bed. Good going, idiot. You're still a real one though, Greg. I respect it. He fucks up so bad that he has to end up going as a small group with Rowley and one of the girls from student council, Abigail. Which Greg sees as just being a date between the two of them, with Rowley tagging along. Which is bound to happen after she bears witness to just how fucking cool he is. Poor little naive Greg hires Rowley's dad to be their personal driver with the intent on taking them all out to a fancy restaurant before the dance. Before getting increasingly pissed that his friend seems to be hitting it off more with the girl, desperately trying to convince her that he's the better option. Honestly though, Greg, I think you're too good for her. And I mean that. This bitch gets taken to a nice-ass place for dinner, where they both instead just want to go to the Diaper Hands restaurant, and on top of all that, Rowley and her both order giant fucking steaks and one dessert too, knowing damn well Greg is like 12 years old. You really expect him to pay for all that? Makes me mad. It was all for nothing as well. This is a middle school party, so all the girls just go off and hang out with each other as the boys start fights because they're boys, get it? Then Abigail sees her old boyfriend who's also there with another girl and starts crying. I have no idea where Rowley is during all this. And best of all, before Greg and her even get the chance to awkwardly dance with each other, he mistakes a spot in her for the chickenpox that Rowley has. He then starts screaming loudly at her, causing her to leave crying as the Chad Rowley walks her home, leaving virgin Greg in the dust. That was bad. Oh yeah, that's right, Rowley has the chickenpox. And he still gets the girl. Joshy was right, respect your parents, follow your dreams, and you'll get everything you pray for. Oh yeah! Greg is so fixated on getting a date that he doesn't really get the chance to do too many horrible things this time. So if I were to give it up to any moment, it would either be where he first discovers Rowley has the chickenpox but forces him to come with him to the dance anyways, or when he, yet again, prays to the Lord above, this time begging him to not get paired up with Ruby Bird in one of their classes. He treats her like this otherworldly freak. Okay, maybe that's because Jeff Kinney draws her like an otherworldly freak, but no, okay, that might be it. Yeah, so it's definitely a more somber ending compared to what we've got in the past few entries, but I thought the third wheel as a whole was a massive step up in quality. Not only is it still pretty funny with a lot of great moments, like Greg and Rowley starting a detective agency, only to use it as an excuse to rummage around people's private property and spy on them, but I also think it's just a breath of fresh air. Don't get me wrong, I love the diary approach, switching between a full year and all, as it allows for them to flip-flop between a bunch of different stories within the same book, which is also ripe for fast-paced anecdotal humor. And sure, this one feels like two different books entirely, but I don't know, seeing how Jeff would tackle fleshing out a whole day for Greg was interesting, and I think it paid off well in helping this one stand out against the rest. It felt like something new for what is already becoming a pretty repetitive series. Again, the art does not help, it all feels the same, not that I would have it any differently. But I'm hoping with this one, Jeff uses it as a chance to tell some standalone Wimpy Kid adventures in the future too, focusing on singular topics like this one and even ugly truth to an extent. I think it only opens him up for more storytelling potential and the ability to explore these characters way further than before. You know, this book actually had me rooting for Greg to win, and I think that in and of itself is an achievement. So, wanna see disgusting baby Manny? I don't remember this one. I mean, I'm sure I had it growing up, but I cannot recall a single aspect of it. Maybe it's because we're back to those big as hell titles, and this cover doesn't help much either. I highly doubt this actually happens in the book. Maybe it's also because of that gross lime green color. I think Jeff is beginning to run out of appealing colors to pick from. I don't even think he does them anymore. The patterns and logo are the gimmick now. Weird. Mom's always saying that friends will come and go, but family is forever. Well, if that's true, I could be in for a rough ride. Well, we're off to a great start at least. I don't know why it keeps catching me off guard considering the past few have all done the same, but I was not expecting them to carry on right after the events of the third wheel. These books were always so much more segmented in my mind than I remembered. Which is strange because that brings into the question of how the fucking timeline of the series works. You may think that's not necessary, but there's a whole ass page on the Wimpy Kid wiki trying to wrap their heads around this. Keep fighting the good fight, guys. Apparently there's a dark conspiracy theory that Greg is dead, and that's why he never ages. But don't worry guys, this is LS Mark, the thinking man's children's media analyst, so we don't buy into silly conspiracies such as that. So okay, here's the Greg Heffley timeline I've come to understand. I'm not sure how accurate this is, sorry. I think Jeff Kenny realized that he was blowing his load way too early. The first two Wimpy Kid entries take place over the span of roughly a year, with Greg turning 12 and 13 at some point in each respectively. However, if he went much further, then he'd have to send Greg to high school eventually, which of course he doesn't want to do. Coward. That's why from then on, each book starts taking place over a shorter and shorter period of time, usually between 2 to 3 months. I guess he figured he was stressing too much about a situation that didn't really matter very much, and so he chose to adopt a moving timeline of sorts, where characters grow and follow along with the current year, yet never age, leaving Greg to stay perpetually 14 years old. That sounds horrible. Anyways, the events from last time carrying over means that, unfortunately for Greg, Rowley and Abigail are still together. I mean, apparently it's only been 9.5 days, but that's a lot for a kid. With this change slowly causing him to feel more and more isolated as she puts a wedge between the two, taking up all his friend's time and even getting him to stop behaving in ways she deems as being immature. The best part of that is that Greg starts to suspect that she's only with Rowley to use him, all because she's having him do the stuff that he forces Rowley to do. Great. But alas, now it's up to Greg to find a new friend/hobby to fill his time, like reading the cool hit children's novel series Slumber Party Pals. The first 30 or so were pretty good, but after that I think the author started running out of ideas. What are you trying to tell us, Jeff? There's a ton of new characters here. We learn more about this school than ever before. Mainly a lot of cliques Greg wants to be part of, along with the new bullies that he's got to handle on his own now, like the Mingo kids. Although I think he should be paying more attention to that harassment case he's landed himself in. Is there any other way to interpret this? Similarly to the third wheel, this for the most part feels like two entirely different books stapled together. Although I'd argue this one does a much better job at making them connect in some way. The topic of this one being friends versus family. The school stuff mainly focuses on Greg's various different ways to try and become popular. Finally, they're getting back to their roots. This is done through him trying to sneak his way into different groups, buying new shoes, which he proceeds to then step in dog shit with. He tries to pathetically use the Find a Friend station, he gets into NFTs for a while, and even does the unthinkable. He tries to befriend Freddy. This backfires almost immediately, however, as Freddy somehow becomes cooler than him. So much so that he even eventually wins the most popular award for the whole year. Great. Greg is so downtrodden here, you can't help but feel bad for him. His life seems miserable. Okay, so you know that feeling when you have a few close friends at school, with most others being people you can talk to and have fun with, but they're not really your friends, you know? There was nothing worse, nothing, than when all the stars would align perfectly to shit on you as you go in and see that none of your friends are in that day, all off for various reasons. And so now you gotta awkwardly walk around at lunchtime trying not to look like you have nowhere else to go. I have friends, they're all just sick, I swear. I think by far the cringiest thing Greg does here is when he's at threat of getting sent off to summer school, and so needs to improve his grades. And so when the teacher calls out his name in music class, he stands up and starts singing as best he can. Only for the teacher to say that she was just doing roll call. That was bad. Speaking of bad, honestly, once again, there's not much here to choose from. But there are two moments I want to highlight as being particularly shitty. First has Greg recall when he'd have Rowley do his cursive English homework for him, rewarding him with 1 cracker per completed page. And the second is when his mom gives him her phone and when he sees that her grandmother is messaging asking for Greg and his dad's help that weekend. Stuff that she's too old to do. He replies as his mom saying that they're too busy that day and to fuck off. No, really, he says that. He also stupidly kills a box full of caterpillars by burning them to death. I guess that's probably the worst. The rest of the story showcases an extended look at the Heffley family tree, gathering for an Easter celebration at their old Mima's house. Why can't you say grandmother, seriously? Turns out they all only came in order to search for her really expensive diamond ring that she lost before she died, with Greg finding it and hiding it away, presumably for a later book. This one ends in a clever way too that ties everything together. After Greg joins the yearbook club as a photographer, he's forced to take a picture of Riley and Abigail for a cutest couple, which pisses him off, of course. But because of that, it makes her ex-boyfriend jealous, resulting in her breaking up with Riley and the two becoming friends again. It was a nice ending, definitely not what I was expecting from the series. What's unexpected, however, is that I think this unironically may be my favorite Wimpy Kid book so far. Maybe I'll change my mind on that later, who knows, but I think this is the one to get across its story the best, along with a bunch of fun moments like Greg trying to get revenge on his classmates by abusing his role as photographer, photoshopping everyone just to look slightly more weird. They've definitely been doing a better job at making Greg more likable as well, someone you would actually want to see succeed. And because of that, it makes this one way more interesting to go through. Seeing him be put at such a low and having to find his way back up to the top, it's good. I am not looking forward to this next one though. I don't know if it's just because I was like 12 when I first read it and I thought I was getting too old for this stuff, or perhaps it's because of its association with that horrible movie. But next up on the list is, unfortunately, you know who I feel bad for? The kid who had to play Greg Heffley in The Long Haul. Poor guy didn't stand a chance. I really wonder how he feels about all that in retrospect. Want to see something scary? This is him now. As a kid, I was so enamored by how much Greg would talk up taking baths, especially in the third wheel. I always hated taking baths. I'm more of a shower guy myself. But I decided to try it out at the time, and honestly, I got it. So from that point on, my new tradition was to read each new Wimpy Kid entry from the comfort of a tub. Except it was one of those really uncomfortable bathtubs where you couldn't really lean back without the back of your head going in the water, which made it even more annoying to try and read a book while you're doing that. All while your back becomes increasingly more wet and sticky, so you set a towel behind you that starts getting soaked in water, which is just a horrible feeling. And sadly, The Long Haul just didn't seem worth that trouble to me. I always thought I got halfway through Old School before quitting, but rereading Long Haul made me realize I didn't even get that far. I quit in the middle of this one. I think I had made buying these books such a yearly habit that I picked up Old School in the hopes of getting back into them, but by that point I was 13. It was no longer cool to like Diary of a Wimpy Kid now that I was in high school. Yeah, we go to high school at 11 in the UK. Don't ask me why they think it's a smart idea to put 11-year-olds in the same school as 18-year-olds. Never ended well. Anyways, The Long Haul gets right into it. This book has no school, no Riley, barely an intro. On page 1, we're immediately introduced to the idea of a Heffley family road trip, and with that, they're off. It caught me off guard, and I'm not sure if it's because I was reading a certain edition or version of it or something, but Jeff has started to put emphasis on certain words by changing the font, and it's so distracting. It completely breaks up the sentence. I hate it. Also, I've refrained from talking about errors so far, as I never know if it's something that was later fixed in future re-releases, but I spotted a pretty noticeably bad one during this where they put the text over the cartoon. Boy, I sure hope somebody got fired for that blunder. Jeff. I wish I could say that it was refreshing to read The Long Haul after sitting through the slog that is the movie adaptation, but unfortunately I'm devastated to say that it's not much different. It's got way less diaper hands humor, I'll give it that, but the plot here is followed almost beat for beat. Main difference being that instead of a spur-of-the-moment family road trip like in the book, it becomes an adventure to Grandma's house for, like, steaks and stuff. Also, gaming convention. I love apps. But other than that, the events are followed almost exactly. I think something worth noting is that despite obviously being a consultant and having some say in the creative process, Jeff Kinney was not the main screenwriter for the original Wimpy Kid trilogy, which were instead handled by various different people. It's just shocked they were able to be so consistent. This all changed with the long haul as Jeff stepped into the writer position, a role he's kept for every Wimpy Kid film that has followed. And I mean this with no heat, I love Jeff Kinney. He even drew a Manny for me, but I don't know, I'd definitely say I prefer him as an author than a screenwriter. The original trilogy were able to divert from the source material in a way that makes it better. They were more willing to take creative liberties. Now, I'm not sure if it's because he has more of a connection to the source material, you know, being the guy who wrote it, or maybe he just didn't think much needed changing. Either way, I think a pair of fresh eyes is always good for something like this, especially for a series like Wimpy Kid where story is not the priority. It's not like The Long Haul's a bad book or anything, it's got a lot of qualities I enjoy a bunch. It's the most we've ever gotten to see of the Heffley family, which is cool. Again, you sort of forget Rodrick is a character half the time. And there's some funny moments like their Captain Underpants parody. But overall, I find this one kind of boring. It's definitely the weakest so far at the very least. I can see completely why this wouldn't entertain me as a kid. Maybe it's because there's such a lack of focus. You know, the road trip is the story here. They're not going anywhere. There's no destination. There's no character stuff going on other than brief periods where his parents reach their breaking points with each other. It's simply a series of unfortunate comedic events that are supposed to be funny enough to carry it all. And like, I thought it was funny when Greg gets bitten by a pig, so they take him to the vet where he becomes terrified at the idea of them sticking a thermometer up his ass. But that's sadly where it peaks. After enough bad shit happens to them, they just decide to go home. Hey, at least it was easier for me to pick a terrible thing Greg does this time. I think this one is up there, honestly. He recounts when they used to have their dog Sweetie and how his mum thought that he got into a bunch of snacks dogs aren't meant to have, and so she took him to the vet to painfully get his poor little dog's stomach pumped. Then afterwards, while it's recovering on the couch, clearly still in agony, Greg comes over and thanks him, because he was the one to eat the snacks and didn't want to own up to it. Wow. The rest of the book, though, is completely reliant on you finding the situations they're in funny, which I don't. I get it's a cartoon and all, but if anything, I think they go too far with it. They don't space out the bad stuff enough for you to catch your breath and hope everything is fine for now. It's just bad thing after bad thing. And at a certain point, you just grow numb to it, like, oh, they lost all their clothes? Well, whatever, they lost their credit cards 2 pages ago. It's not like they were going to be able to go to a hotel to change or anything. Oh, what's that? Their car broke down? Well, they lost their credit cards. It's not like they could pay for gas anyway. It just goes too far. I always liked how real these books felt, how grounded they were. But this just evolves into wacky absurdities by the end. Manny getting them home by learning perfect Spanish and the Heffleys taking in their new pet pig. I just don't care about it when there's no consequences to these actions. Like, the villains here are this Beardo family, who seem to be going everywhere the Heffleys are. And while at the water park, they assume that this family are the people who stole all their stuff from the locker. And so while driving home, they see them at a motel and decide to break into the room to steal everything back, as well as Greg's dad calling the police on them. But they just walk into their room, see they don't have any of their stuff, the family walks in and freaks out, so they just run out and drive away. Like, I don't know, wouldn't it have been more in line with the series' humor if they made this accusation, the police come verifying they stole nothing and only see that the Heffleys broke into their room, them being the ones to not get in trouble? The series used to be about cringe humor, not pigs shitting in toilets. And it sucks because there are a lot of things in here I like. Jokes that feel right at home, like them getting mad at traffic only to find out they crashed a fucking funeral service, then accidentally leading everyone to a pet cemetery. But there's never any consequence for this. They don't live here, so there's no long-lasting result from anything. They come in, they fuck shit up, and leave. Rinse and repeat for 200 pages. Maybe my disdain towards that terrible film also contributes to it a bit, but I do not like The Long Haul. Bottom of my list by a mile. Which is worrying because now I'm headed into uncharted territory. Everything from this read is new to me. Let's see if I was missing out on anything worthwhile. Well, here we go. Never before seen Wimpy Kid content for me right here. And I'd like to start this off with immediate bitching. It just looks so bland. I get you were running out of colors, Jeff, but the brine was already pushing it. It also irrationally bothered me as a kid that they finally decided to change the subtitle to this radical 90s graffiti font. Not because it looked bad, but because I think it marked a point in the series where you could officially say it had run its course. With them wanting to advertise this one slightly differently. Not to try and make it seem like something it's not, but instead as a way to make this one feel a little bit more exciting, I guess. And boy, does it need it, because old school fucking sucks. I did not like this one in the slightest. You're off the hook this time, long haul. The theme of old school is old versus new, television versus radio, Twitter versus a good old newspaper. With Greg's mom getting on his ass more often about his over-reliance on technology, we see Greg venting about the various situations it's put him in. Whether it be Susan organizing a community unplugging for 48 hours or Greg getting sent off to camp for a few days. Not a bad theme, even if I do think it's a little tired at this point. How many unique stories can you even come up with for a topic like that, considering it's already something that's been sprinkled throughout the rest of the series? Well, if old school is anything to go by, that answer is too. Like, wasn't a major aspect of the long haul that it was a tech-free holiday? Did we really need an entire book on the topic so soon? Either way, it's not like it's that prominent or anything. They go in a somewhat new direction with it, even if I'd argue Greg going to camp isn't the most exciting thing out there. But you really start getting the vibe from this one that the series is being treated more and more like an episodic cartoon where anything can happen. Something Jeff is more than willing to point out. I feel like I've been in middle school forever. Sounds like a horrible existence. I mean, we open right on it. They've still got the pig living with them, except now it's somehow gained the ability to walk, communicate, and roam the town doing its own thing. It's a funny visual, sure, but you can see the line of realism versus absurdity becoming more and more blurred. That's a very fine line that once you cross, you can't really go back from. And look, I get it, it is a cartoon, it's for kids, wah. But I don't know, I feel something I was able to appreciate so much about these books was that it did come off as real. That this could be the life of your average kid that no one understands. Anyways, the first half of the book is mainly taken up by that town unplug, but that's after about 70 pages of nothing. Well, except Greg predicting Uber Eats. It's mostly focused on his granddad and how bad of a house guest he is, especially after his girlfriend from the last book dumped him, leaving him to once again be on the prowl. I mean, I guess there's also Rodrick getting a job at an ice cream store, but all that does is once again put him out of the picture for a majority of this thing. I think I'm just getting tired of Greg's mom as a whole. She does the same thing every time we see her, stopping whatever his plan is through keeping him in check. She's so one note that I'm really starting to hate how much of a focus they give her now. The big unplugging leads to Greg trying to rake in some cash through all the foot traffic now outside. However, every idea seems to fail as he eventually gets left having to clean up the local park with her and the rest of the losers. And a couple convicts, I guess. But then this just results in him trying to break free and escaping with one of the said convicts. Them trying to avoid the wrath of Mrs. Heffley, which lasts all of 4 pages as they immediately get caught and Greg blames the whole thing on him. Although, I will say, if I find 2 little boys, one of which in their underwear, along with an escaped jailbird, also in his underwear, I think I'd believe Greg too. It's just too nonsensical for me. None of this is for the purpose of building to anything. It's simply meant to be silly and fun, which I can understand, but it just doesn't do it for me. Then he said that to make lemonade, we need a I think it picks up a little bit once Greg flees to Hardscrabble Farms after crashing his dad's car into a ditch while on a joyride with their granddad. But even then, it's just because something is happening. The place is a shithole and everybody is miserable. Worst part is Riley's dad is their chaperone, but after a little bit it starts getting repetitive. It's 100 pages of different reasons as to why this camp is shit, the only looming threat being the rumors of a deranged man in the woods. I like what they do with Frank, he's the most consistent thing about this one, becoming increasingly more fed up with his dad and taking all that out on Greg. Which comes to a head once Riley's dad nearly dies at camp, and has to be replaced with Frank coming in to be the new chaperone against his will. But it happens so late, there's only like 20 pages left by that point. The rest is filled up with fucking screaming goat videos. Remember screaming goat video? I will say, I enjoyed the ending a bunch, where Greg goes into the woods and realizes there was no man at all. It was all just a rumor Frank started when he was a kid to make sure nobody finds a free bathroom and shower out there. And the last page is incredibly funny, where after finding this out, Greg decides he's gonna continue to fuck with people by having the legacy of the men live on. Probably the worst thing he does here. But it's too little too late. There really has been a very sudden shift in how these books feel, and I'm not sure if it's just because I don't have my rose-tinted glasses on anymore. You know, I didn't grow up with any of these ones. I'm hoping things start to pick up though, because if not, I'm in for a bad time considering I still have like 13 novels left to read. Double Down is actually a pretty monumental book in the series. Apparently, after releasing the previous 10th novel, Jeff Kinney was contemplating whether or not he wanted to put an end to Greg Heffley's misadventures. I'm not exactly sure what rejuvenated his interest, but he did go on to claim, Double Down is really special to me because it reflects a renewed commitment to the series and a plan for the future. And if there's anything I can take away from that after reading through it, his plan for the future seems to be more of the same. Maybe that's what the title represents. It's literally Jeff Kinney doubling down on the Wimpy Kid franchise. This trend ain't stopping until the kids quit buying. He had the new coloring gimmick. From now on, he's gonna reuse previously used colors, but slap another on the spine for variety and to help it stand out. But I do find it fitting that it's red, just like the original. Seems kinda like his way of using this as a soft reset after things got a bit carried away. And if you couldn't tell things were getting desperate, the subtitle is even done to look like the cheese. They bring it up again here, and it was so jarring, I forgot it used to be a part of the franchise. The cheese was so focused on in Wimpy Kid's marketing. I think they even made a board game out of it. It's kind of funny to consider how small of a role it actually plays in the series. Dude, I wonder if there were any kids genuinely pissed off at the false marketing behind this one. Like, just listen to Jeff describe it.
In the new book, Greg's mom goes back to school. That means Greg is home alone every day, and he has to take care of himself.
But Greg's mom going to school and leaving Greg home alone takes up maybe 10 pages of this entire book.
I can't say too much, but I will say that geese are involved.
And that takes up even less. Dog days, Greg's summer vacation, long haul, family road trip, double down. It's almost like you can see him acknowledging how much this series has run its course, highlighting the See Him Kept in Underpants parody from a couple books ago and talking about how nobody cares about them anymore. They're no longer cool to read. Kinda sad. But don't get me wrong though, I would take Double Down over the previous couple. It is a vast improvement. Actually managed to be funny. I loved the whole intro of Greg believing that his life was some kind of Truman Show-esque scenario, living his everyday as if someone were watching him, walking around winking at non-existent cameras, even believing that the birth of Manny was to rejuvenate interest in the show. This leads into a lot of fun tangents, like him ranting about what he would do if he were in heaven, venting about how awful it is still living with that fucking pig. He gets it incredibly sick and almost kills it, which is cool. And a large aspect of the early pages are about his mum becoming more and more sick of him lying so much. Finally, a return to form. She calls it his pattern of deception, which I think is just the perfect name for it. Worst thing he does, though, would have to be intentionally breaking into the girl's locker room, presumably to see boobies, believing if he wore camouflage, nobody would be able to see him. I don't know either. After all that, however, it turns into a big lesson about responsibility, with Susan wanting Greg to put more thought into his future, even if he's just content with becoming a bin man. He even goes to college with her as she's taking up her classes again, getting sidetracked by becoming the tutor for a girl who thinks he's some kind of baby genius, which was pretty good. But the main thing they focus on here is him joining the school band, only doing so to get invited to one of the girls' big Halloween parties, forcing his dad to buy him a French horn he doesn't even want to play. How much are French horns? Okay, average French horn cost. $600, dude? What the fuck? I wish all this stuff wasn't abandoned out of nowhere, though. Again, he's only doing it to go to the Halloween party, so after that's done, we barely continue hearing about it. Nothing very notable even happens there as Mum tags along, but nobody cares and enjoys her company. Perfect, glad we bothered setting this up for half the book. Again, I think Double Down has a ton of great elements, but it doesn't come together the best. The conclusion is by far one of the weakest. In the advertising, they keep bringing up Rowley and Greg making their own monster movie, something you would think takes up a sizable chunk of the pages. But as I kept reading, it just never came, until around page 180 or something. It's incredibly tacked on and doesn't serve any purpose. Greg just finds gummy worms and wants to do something with it. So they make a movie. I think Jeff was trying to parallel it to the start of the book where Greg talks about thinking his life is like a TV show, where an incident during filming causes Rowley to become famous with appearances on talk shows and shit. Greg now lamenting how the theme has changed his friend. But I don't know, it doesn't tie itself up very neatly. It all happened so fast, and not even the joke that they taped their movie over Manny's first steps was funny enough to make it work. I have a feeling, however, that they're going to use this as a chance to have the next book talk about Rowley now being famous, which I'm not looking forward to. We just got back on track, do we really need to get more absurd? Still though, ending aside, Double Down was fine. It's not going to end up anywhere near the top of my favorites list or anything, but I had fun with it, and I guess that's all that matters. You sort of get the feeling that Jeff is seriously running out of ideas, not that I can blame him. I'm really curious how much more longevity this series has. It seems like he's constantly unsure of whether or not to put the thing to rest. But as long as they keep coming out, I guess I gotta keep reading them. Hooray! Damn, did we really need another vacation plot so soon? I mean, I'll give it to the Getaway, at least this one actually feels like a vacation, but still, we're already back to this? It's not even like he's writing a diary each day based on what's happening at this point. From the start, it's established that this is simply Greg recounting the events of his vacation, well long after it occurred. With it being so cold, being Christmas and all, Greg's parents decide they're gonna take everyone to the wonderful Isla de Corrals, an all-inclusive resort beast somewhere. With the novel basically being Jeff Kinney's way of ripping into the process of going on holiday, with how horrible the airports are, how dangerous these countries are, and Greg's disdain towards foreigners. Maybe it's just because I went to Spain a lot as a kid, but this one kinda hit right at home for me. Like The Long Haul, it's one of the weaker entries, but I was still able to relate enough to the shenanigans to stay entertained the whole way through. Also, if you live in Ireland or the UK, it is 99% likely you went to Spain on all your holidays. I think I met more British people than Spanish while in that country. I'm shocked at how positive I was towards it because of how slowly it's paced. Hell, it takes them 70 pages to get off the fucking plane. There is non-stop airport bitching for the first half or so. I get it though. As someone who during COVID times was flying at minimum 8 or 9 times per year, yeah, it was hell. You know how I know that? I wasn't able to fly at all for the past 2 years while sorting out visa stuff, and the second I stepped back in an airport again, my stomach churned. I cannot believe how horrible the airport process is. And when you're on the flight, it gets even worse. You have to deal with fucking turbulence along with all the safety stuff that makes you feel as if every flight is gonna be your last. So I was able to relate to Greg here. Unfortunately, my biggest gripe with the Getaway is that once they actually get to the resort, the story just sorta halts, not much happens. It's more of an excuse to make gags about the different things to do at these places. Dude, I'm telling you, the Heffleys must be fucking loaded. Not only can they afford this expensive-ass trip on Christmas, while booking the day before leaving, and while on the trip they also decide to book a goddamn boat trip. I don't know why Greg is complaining so much. I wish I was in this family. I like that as these go on, you can tell from the writing that Jeff is getting older and older. Like, I don't know, if I were a 14-year-old boy, I sure wouldn't be calling a phone my electronic device. Okay, that was mean. Let's balance it out. Hey, Jeff, this drawing? It's good. You know there's not much going on in this one by judging how I write my notes for them. Usually for one that I'm engaged in, I'll write down the plot points, the page numbers, maybe a comment here and there, what I'm thinking while reading. But for one like this where I have nothing to say, it's nothing but plot beats. Spider in his shoe. They kill the spider. I have no notes. All the fun stuff is booked up or not available. Rodrick gets a girlfriend. I didn't even bother taking down the page number for half of these, because I know damn well I'm not actually going to mention them. What is there to say? None of these plot points have any real through line. Oh, when the Heffleys come back to the resort, they see Rodrick's girl kissing another guy. Damn, I guess. I appreciate what he tried doing for the ending, but at the same time, I think it starts to border on nonsensical, just like The Long Haul, where things keep building and building to a cartoonish degree and it sort of takes you out of it. Still though, I like that he tried giving it a payoff. See, when they get to the resort, they realize they picked up the wrong bag at the airport. It's also established throughout the following pages that without their clothes, they can't really get into any of the actual restaurants nearby. So by the end, they find out they can just use the clothes from the taken suitcase and use those to get in. And just when everything starts going well and they begin enjoying themselves as a family, the folks who own the suitcases report them to security and they get banned and driven back to the airport. On its own, that's funny enough, would have made a fine ending. But I guess because of Jeff's obsession with making every single book have the exact same page count, Susan decides she doesn't want to leave without one good family photo, and so they sneak back in and wind up destroying the place. Greg gets blown away on a windsurfer, lands on a nudist beach, he knocks down the wall separating the kids from the adults only area. It keeps going and going until they just leave and are banned again. Like, yeah, I already got that. Honestly, though, I respect the level of ADD needed to pull a move like making each book 217 pages, supposedly so they would all line up perfectly together on a shelf. Given the chance, I'd do the same thing. I don't blame him. The Getaway leaves me feeling nothing other than, well, hopefully the next one's better. But more so because of my intrigue as to how Jeff managed to write 6 more after this one, with a 19th book on the way now. Give it up for book 19. Announced like 2 days before I finished this video. Kill me. The idea of a kid in middle school with each novel having to conform to the diary format seems so limiting. What can you do really? Christmas, summer, autumn, spring. That's really it. Anything else you try starts to seem too outlandish for what the books are, so you're left between a rock and a hard place. Seems like Jeff has tried doing both in recent times, like Double Dawn and The Getaway are completely different in structure. And honestly, I don't know which I'd take at this point. Obviously, I like the more down-to-earth stuff, but what else can he do? It feels like he's covered all grinds. I suppose I'll find out eventually, so for now, let's move on to... Oh yeah, he doesn't do anything that bad here. Gotta say, I was not looking forward to the Meltdown. Not only do I hate this fucking subtitle font, but didn't we already get a winter book not long ago? I seriously don't know what else he can add. But you know what? Then I read it. And I came out of it with an entirely different view. Not only is this one better than Cabin Fever, but it's also one of the better Wimpy Kid novels, period. It's January, meaning it's only been a couple weeks since the events of the Getaway. And since then, a couple things have happened. Like the unnamed pig has since ran away, unlikely to ever return. Let's assume he got turned into bacon and swiftly move on. Something that hasn't changed since they left was the weather. If anything, it's only gotten worse. The snow piling up outside their house, which has made Greg and Rowley's walk to school a total bitch. The Meltdown has an incredibly random theme you wouldn't expect from a Wimpy Kid book. Survival. There's three major focal points the book likes to focus on. Those being Greg's fear of a technological uprising, a big snowball war taking place in the neighborhood, and global warming. Yes, really. I don't know if he wanted this one to be slightly more topical or educational, and hey, if so, I'm not complaining. I liked this book. If the worst thing I can say about it is how dated the dabbing kid has become, then I'd say you've done a pretty good job. Because of this consistent theme, it really harkened me back to those early few entries. Us seeing Greg use these topics as jumping grounds for rants about his plans and worries for the future. And he's got some pretty insightful commentary. For example, his excellent response to the threat of global warming. Don't blame me, I just got here. The main antagonist, though, isn't our eventual looming demise as a species. Oh god. Instead, it's the feud happening on Greg's street between the kids who live on the slope of the hill versus those who live on that flat part, with frequent snowball wars erupting each day. I really like the detail near the end where Greg starts getting advice from his dad on how to handle them. Something they brought up in the early books was how he was a bit of a history buff, loving wars and recreating battlegrounds with his figurines. It was a nice detail that he would be the one with the knowledge to help his son. They also spend a ton of time at the beginning setting up all the kids in town, a detail I initially thought was done to fill up space, but instead it's a clever method of giving this place some actual notable characters they can call back to during the war, not just being a horde of faceless kids. Jeff drew a lot of fun full-page pictures depicting this event too, that was cool. Something I picked up on was how unique a lot of the girls were drawn here. May seem like such a nothing point to bring up, but I recall when I was reading the movie diary, Jeff said he wanted all the girl characters to look nearly identical, as it was a way of representing how Greg perceives the world. To him, all girls may as well be the same because it's not like he's gonna notice the nuances as a 12-year-old. Maybe he simply forgot about that detail or didn't want to be held back by a restriction most wouldn't even notice, but I'll just headcanon it as a cool piece of subtle character growth. I want to know what's up with Jeff's obsession with Flat Stanley, though. Back in the long haul, there was an entire segment dedicated to describing Flat Stanley, and he brings it back here too for a short joke. It only sticks out to me because I remember as a kid when I read that, I felt so seen. Nobody I talk to ever knows what Flat Stanley is, but we had to read those novels all the time in primary school. If I were to have any major criticism of the Meltdown, it would have to be the repetitiveness at times. Not only visually, with a majority of this thing just being snow, but so much of what Greg's talking about is simply how inconvenient it is walking to and from school in the cold and how the other kids are dealing with it. Or it's continuously about them getting attacked by snowballs on their way home, which makes the ending a little less special since we already see bits of the war happening throughout. And it's only now I'm remembering the 40 or so pages where he just bitches about germs. Definitely isn't my favorite or anything, but it really is the slight repetitiveness holding it back in my opinion. Like, this book also has a crazy creature rumored to be in the woods. Like, Jesus, at least space it out a little bit from old school. It was like 2 books ago. At least I think it was. Oh god, here it is. They're all blending together in my mind. It is now mush, a concoction of stick figures and Zooey Mama. Wait, remember when Zooey Mama was a thing? They don't say that anymore. Don't get me wrong though, there are some moments that surprised me here and there, and others that had my jaw dropped. You have moments Jeff felt the need to include, like Rowley needing to go to the bathroom on their walk home, so Greg forces him to go behind a rock only to find out he had to shit and not piss, so now he's just shitting in some random guy's yard. But the moment that caught me most off guard is whenever Greg and Rowley, yet again pissed off about their long walk home, decide to just sneak into Greg's grandma's house while she's gone on vacation. They want to clean their wet clothes and so throw them in the dryer, awkwardly waiting around with each other in their underwear before deciding to just put on some of his grandmother's clothes. At that point, they get a shock as Greg's mum walks down and sees them, to which she wants to almost avoid the topic entirely, telling Greg it's okay, he's just using his imagination and playing and to not talk about this ever again. I don't know if this is like a gay joke because they were in their underwear in a basement together, or if this is a cross-dressing joke since he was putting on her clothes. Either way, I cannot believe what I was reading. Where the fuck did that come from, Jeff? caught me off guard as much as Greg the Killer right here. You know what though, I was pleasantly surprised by the Meltdown. Eating my top 5, but this was another solid one. Shows that you don't need to have the most original idea out there and that it's all about execution. Because from the outside looking in, I could have never anticipated this being one of the Wimpy Kids I liked. Let's hope things stay on track from here as we get to the last book before we gotta start talking about the spin-offs. Not looking forward to that. I forgot all about them, honestly. It's time for book 14. I think I'm losing track. I hate how this one looks. It's so unappealing. The orange and gray along with the metallic texture. Ugh. The theme for this one is, houses, I suppose? How exciting. We see Greg do various stuff around his home, such as spring cleaning, having garage sales, getting stuck on the roof, normal kid stuff. Just a lot of bumming around until the main plot kicks in, where it's announced that Greg's great aunt Reba has passed away. R.I.P. With that, she's left the Heffleys a hefty inheritance, with Susan deciding the best thing to do with it would be to build an extension onto the house. And so construction begins, with the majority of the book then becoming about all that relatable construction humor the kids love so much. To me, it started picking up near the end once the building seriously fucks up. They realize they were building slightly onto the lawn of their neighbor, which forces them to tear down the whole thing, wasting the entire inheritance money. Guess great aunt Reba died for nothing. But because of that blunder, Susan just wants them to flat out move out of town, so it becomes all about that process, finding a new house, trying to sell the current one, Greg having to break the news to Rowley. I feel like that could have been the focal point for way longer. It all happened so fast. Especially with how out of nowhere the ending is. Of course, they couldn't move the Heffley family permanently, but I wish their plans falling apart didn't happen so abruptly at the end. Their movers come a week early, meaning they have to scramble to get everything out on time, and which every complication that could go wrong does go wrong. This guy starts stealing their stuff from the curb and nobody's ready to leave. They start using a crane to lift stuff above the house, which knocks over their chimney and drops through the roof, leaving the floors filled with giant holes. And so, predictably, the family buying the house no longer wants it. The Heffleys are out of money, and so now can't buy a new one, getting stuck right where they began. Except now with a hole in the floor. A pattern I started noticing in Jeff Kinney's writing is that when he wants to make these novels feel as if they have more of a standard plot, you know, a start, middle, and end and all, his method of doing that usually revolves around a couple simple gags rather than actual character stuff. Not anything worth mentioning before, but I think here it's at its worst. Like, for example, in the Getaway, they set up near the start how Greg wants to do windsurfing with dolphins, how his parents wanted to be on the adult side of it, the giant wall separating them, and a loose spider Greg is afraid of. And so instead of telling a natural conclusion where everything fits together neatly, he just rushes to bring all these plot points back in one go, like Greg gets stuck on a surfboard and meets a bunch of dolphins, before landing on the adult side of the beach where the spider from before scares him and makes him break down the wall. It's too bloated, you can't really hold on to any one of these moments because they're all happening so fast. It's even worse here, it's like a Rube Goldberg machine. Just keeps going and going until he runs out of callbacks. It's not a bad method of writing or anything, but again, it's just getting kind of stale. Like he's complacent in this new Wimpy Kid structure. There are some good parts, but they're few and far between. Like when Greg recounts how he used to draw really dark and twisted endings to his kids' books, resulting in him getting a one-way ticket to the counselor. I'm surprised I never read this one because I'd faced an extremely similar scenario as a kid. There was a couple years when I got really into Wimpy Kid and would draw the characters all the fucking time. One of my favorite aspects of the original was when Greg and Rowley would draw comics together and we'd actually get to see what they had done. I thought this would be so fun, so I started making comics too, with the gag at the end of each of them being somebody getting injured. But it was like stick figures, it's not like I was drawing this or anything. I made hundreds, thousands even, so much so that I decided to make it a series creatively called Die. Okay, look, in retrospect, I was super proud of this, but every time I would show one to my mom, she would say I needed to stop, that it might affect my future and make me seem crazy. But I couldn't stop. I was getting prepared to start production on my most ambitious project yet. Die. The movie. I knew I couldn't take these home with me, so I just stuffed them under my desk in class. By the way, I was like 9, I think, for frame of reference. Well, one day we were doing spring cleaning or something where everyone had to clear out what was underneath our desks. And while I wasn't looking, some bozo went to clean mine, only for all the pages to spill out on the floor. This person then proceeded to run to the teacher with them, and naturally, I was called up. But luckily, this was Ireland, and nobody wants to deal with emotions there. And so I got a stern talking to and a slap on the wrist. Off I went to never express myself again. but sometimes it just comes out of me. I had more fun reminiscing about that experience than I did reading Wrecking Ball. I don't know, it's just so bare bones, there's nothing to really even say. Which is worrying considering I still have 7 books left to go. But if there's one thing I can hope for with the following entries, it's that I'm praying for something with actual substance. If there were ever an argument for which Wimpy Kid book phones it in the most, I'd have to point to this one. Well, here we are. Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid, the spin-off series that lasted a grand total of 3 books. When the first came out in 2019, they started running concurrently to the main series, but there hasn't been a 4th installment for about 3 years now, so I think it's safe to say this experiment is as good as dead. Which must suck for Jeff, as he went out there saying that Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid is his favorite Wimpy Kid book ever. That's a bold claim, dude, especially for what's essentially Planet Sheen. Was this needed? A book focusing on Rowley of all characters? You know what, though? I could have learned to accept this if it showed me why it needed to exist. The only thing I could possibly say I got out of this was finding it cool to see Rowley's perspective on some things. Like his reaction to finding out that his dad doesn't like Greg, but we really don't need a whole book for that. The general setup is that we're seeing Rowley want to start his own diary just like Greg, trying to keep it from him as long as possible, knowing he's going to get mad about the copying. It doesn't take long for Greg to find out what's going on, though, and so threatens to sue his friend. And so to cover his trails and gain his approval, Rowley claims that instead of being a diary, his book will be a biography of his best friend instead. That is it, that's all you're getting here. It's just various scenarios Rowley has had to face since befriending Greg. The one joke being how every story somehow manages to divert attention away from the person he's claiming to be writing about, focusing way more on his own thoughts and experiences. It's a very meta book. Every Wimpy Kid book is written in a very formal way, but it doesn't ever come off like Greg is speaking to anyone in particular. However, here, because he knows he's writing a book intended to be read by the masses, we see him acknowledge the audience more, although it's more often than not to apologize for constantly losing track of where his stories are going. Sometimes it's funny, like when he says sorry if Greg is reading this because he knows it makes him look bad, but they overdo it seriously. It's not even really all that entertaining, it's more depressing. Again, the one interesting thing I find about it is getting to see a perspective of this world outside of Greg, but it really paints a different picture of their friendship. Greg has never been more miserable to hear about, constantly bullying or being a spoiled brat to his friend. I think there's maybe one story he can recount where Greg actually sticks up for him, but then there's about 5 or 6 more that end with Rowley cowering in his house waiting for Greg to leave so he doesn't beat him with a stick. It works, occasionally. I liked the joke about Greg telling Rowley the star in the phone dial is actually a snowflake, being a direct line to Santa Claus he can use anytime Rowley doesn't do what he says. But by the end, it's nothing but story after story of them fighting with each other, and it's just boring. There's also a surprising amount of filler, something I was not anticipating to say in this video. First of all, the drawings are giant, which certainly highlights how simple they are. Rowley's art style is funny when it pops up here and there in the main books, but it's not visually interesting enough to warrant taking up so much of these pages. Sometimes the filler is done in a clever way, like it's pretty funny when he says he has to write down some of Greg's achievements when he actually has some, and so leaves the rest of the page blank so he can come back to it in the future. But then other times it's something as shameless as him going, "Oh, I find a bunch of old Zooey Mama comics I never shared," and so the next 10 pages are nothing but said comics. I think you probably could have been more lax towards your 217 pages rule for this one, Jeff, because boy, does it not need it. The biggest issue I have with Awesome Friendly Kid, fucking mouthful by the way, is the same situation we've seen time and time again with these spin-offs focusing on the comic relief. And it's that when you make them the front-running protagonist, it starts to show why they were so good as an addition to the main character, not the focal point. Because the Rowley in this book is incredibly one-note. It was not a smart idea to make this whole thing about him and Greg, as it only further showcases how little potential there is with standalone Rowley adventures. We know exactly how Rowley is going to react to every situation. We know he's never going to put his foot down and always forgive Greg because that's what the Flanderized version of him has become. Where on the contrary, many of these early novels have been about Rowley finally distancing himself from the devil incarnate. But the way this one reads gives you the impression that the Rowley writing this book would never even think of abandoning Greg. He's simply too stupid to understand he's being taken advantage of. It's strange to consider how seldom used Rowley even was throughout the series up until this point. He's barely in Rodrick Rules, Dog Days, Ugly Truth, Hard Luck. Even later ones like Wrecking Ball don't put much attention on him, because he can't work as Greg's solo sidekick, and certainly not as a leading man, boy. He's Greg's friend, that's all he is to me. They're not tied to the hip or anything, and so an entire book dedicated to how much he loves his friend despite all their faults doesn't do it for me, especially with how much it starts to drag towards the end. I don't even know what I can expect from the others, they have such strange titles. Rowley Jefferson's Awesome Friendly Adventure and Rowley Jefferson's Awesome Spooky Stories. Them ditching the diary thing at least gives me a little bit of hope that they're gonna stand out, but has he even wrote a novel outside of Wimpy Kid? Are there any examples of him breaking out of this formula at all? Not from the looks of it, no. I told you it was gonna be bad. Well, lit for that Greg. Fuck this book. The highlight was him pissing out Greg's window. This cover sucks. The pool texture is cool and all, but it blends in way too much with Cabin Fever. The blue is too similar. It's kind of hard for me to believe this is book 15. I would have never imagined these going on this long when I was first reading them. I'm honestly impressed he was able to come up with enough stories to fill each of them. Alright, what happens in the deep end? The Heffleys go on vacation again, perfect. Yep, you heard that right. Greg and company are yet again headed out of the suburbs. Although this time they at least have a better excuse. With their house getting all but destroyed by the end of Wrecking Ball, it's left them living in their grandmother's house for the past 2 months. Even worse, the Heffleys are now broke. Shit. And so to come up with a fun but affordable way to spend their summer, they take one of their relatives' camper vans out to explore the great wilderness, except not really, it's sort of just a mix between the long haul and the getaway. He wrote a joke in here about them wanting to become one of those YouTube vlogger families who 9 times out of 10 get exposed for abusing their kids, which at first I find so cringy and such an easy joke to make, but then I remembered that is the kind of stuff kids are growing up with these days, so why not mention them? It's kind of sad. I think the structure of the deep end as a whole is just way worse than the others. I've brought up before how Jeff has become complacent in having his books feel like 2 different stories, the first and last 100 pages both coming off like they could have came from different books entirely. But here I think it has the opposite problem. They don't get into their destination, Camper's Eden, until around halfway through, but that first half is still just them finding different places to stop at before settling on the last. But like, camper parks aren't that interesting of a setting. I feel like if you've seen one, you've seen them all. So you almost wish they'd get there sooner to actually start trying to do something, but otherwise the structure is simply, they drive, they stop off, something goes wrong. They drive, they stop off, something goes wrong. They drive, they stop off, something goes wrong. But even then, once they get there, it's not like anything is that much more entertaining. The whole gag is that the place is kind of shitty. As someone who's visited holiday caravan parks, I concur. They huddle all the economy vans together so nobody has any room. There's a bunch of snot-nosed kids running around the place. Skunks will just come by and start spraying shit. Not a cool place. So you start to wonder why they even bother sticking around. They try to establish Greg making some friends, but next to nothing comes from it. At least not enough to warrant trying to introduce them all separately with their own name tags. I can't wait to see what comes from all my new favorite Diary of Wimpy Kid characters, such as Fivehead, Cutter, Regular Marcus, and Doodoo. All that comes from this is they start fucking with other visitors, and so Greg ditches them. He then has to start avoiding them after they want to blame all the pranks on him, but before they even get the chance to do anything with this, there comes a big thunderstorm that ends up flooding the place. Everyone now being stuck after the bridge is struck by lightning and scrambling for supplies. Wait, when did this one come out? October of 2020, okay? Maybe this was inspired by the pandemic, who knows?
2020 stinks.
It then just turns into the finale Jeff has gotten so comfortable with, where everything starts to go wrong at once and builds upon itself to create an unimaginable situation. They try to drive out of the place but land in a stream where the RV starts falling apart and the toilet erupts, shit spills everywhere. And now here they are hurtling towards the very bridge that's keeping them there. But never fear! Manny is once again here to save the day as he steers the vehicle perfectly where the gap on the bridge is. Everyone being able to escape and allowing the Heffley family to have the Camper's Eden all to themselves. Aww. The ending is sweet, but that's about it. Deep End ain't bad or anything, but there's not much really worth saying about it. It's fine. Although what the fuck, that cover is such false advertising. He is underwater for about half a page. I wish I had more to say about this one, I really do. I decided to look up some fun facts about it to try and have something to say, but all I got was the confirmation that yes, this is indeed Jeff Kinney's nod to COVID in the Wimpy Kid universe. Apparently he didn't want to directly cover it because it would be too depressing, not to mention become insanely dated. But he did mention throwing in a lot of his experiences of living in lockdown into the gags. I fucking knew something was off when it opened on Frank doing a Zoom call. You know, these Wimpy Kid books don't even need reviews for the covers because of course they're going to sell 1 billion copies. But I find it weird that they never ever tried to update them between the novels. Like, they've been using these same quotes for like a decade now, they don't even apply to the current ones. Whatever, nothing left to say, the Deep End isn't very good, come on, let's go. Oh boy, more fun Rowley hijinks. Here we go again. Interestingly, however, it seems like this may just be the first book by Jeff Kinney to not adhere to the usual Wimpy Kid formula. Completely forgot this one doesn't even have diary in the title, wow. It also opens with Chapter 1. Whoa, it's like a book or something. Rowley is writing a storybook about a young boy named Roland, whose mom has been captured by a warlock, and so he sets out on a journey to save her. At this point, we cut to reality where Rowley in real time is discussing his process in creating the novel. He shows Greg what he's done so far, who proceeds to shit all over it. If Rowley really wants to make a successful book series, then he's gonna need his help. And so we move on to Chapter 2 and the cycle repeats. The story progresses a bit, we cut back to real time as Greg reacts to what he's just read, gives Rowley notes on the book so far, and then we witness that feedback get integrated into the story in the following chapter. It's not a bad idea. If this book were about 100 pages shorter, this shit goes on for 14 chapters. It's not like it's long or anything, but that structure gets so repetitive after a while. I get it, Greg loves money and Rowley is nice, there has to be something more than that. Rowley's personality has only gotten worse over time due to him wanting to constantly keep his integrity and tell a story that supports his morals. We constantly have to listen to him go on and on about how he wants to promote being nice and kind and not bullying. And it's like, I get it. And that doesn't annoy me because I want my kids' books to have a more surprising story with twists and turns. But it's because I want to put this book down at all times. I have no desire to continue reading other than for the sake of working on this video. There was nothing to keep me hooked. It's like he came up with an admittedly fun idea, but ran it into the ground for another 217 pages. The entire joke is that Greg only focuses on what makes the book marketable. Wanting Rowley to have a buff friend they can make action figures of. Happy about it having a vampire because it means they can now sell to little girls. Talks about how to make the movie adaptation. Epic narwhals for the kids. At first this was kind of funny, seeing Greg say how the story couldn't have a princess in need of rescuing because it means that Rowley will get a bunch of hate mail calling him sexist. Like, that's funny. But after the literal 14th time, I was ready to call it fucking quits. It picks up slightly, and I do mean slightly by the last couple pages, where Rowley gets annoyed and just starts filling it with all the stuff he wants to, where even in his book where he's the hero, he can still have Santa come in and start bullying him at the end. I find that a tad humorous. And it's got a weirdly wholesome ending where Greg winds up loving the book, because it now means he can sell it as a Christmas thing, but that's it. All I can really do here is describe the plot to you, but do you really care? So here, I'll save us all the trouble of me actually having to sit down and go into detail about what the fuck Rowley Jefferson's super awesome, spectacularly fucking epic adventure is. And so just have the Cliff Notes version. I had nothing to say, my notes were already just going over what was happening in the plot, so we might as well just get it out of the way. Starts with fake story about kid named Roland who has to save his mom from a wizard. The story is intentionally poorly written. Shows Chapter 1 to Greg, who criticizes it. Chapter 2 introduces Roland's friend, Garg the Barbarian. Greg wants it to be really merchandisable. Chapter 3 has them in a desert. They do chores for villagers. Chapter 4, they continue and find pixies. Learn of the trolls. Roland gets the sword and the stone. Chapter 5, they find the trolls. The trolls are in the right and so they all make peace. Chapter 6, they find a minotaur in a cave with Huckleberry Finn, the Cowardly Lion, and Thor, and Sherlock Holmes. Garg is turned into stone by Medusa. Chapter 7, he's on his own. Greg thinks this is boring. Me too. Chapter 8, meets a wizard who turns everyone back. Chapter 9, this is so repetitive, is this really the whole book? Gets taken by giant eagles. Story about Rowley having a leech in his cock, wow. Chapter 10, they find a vampire. Chapter 11, vampire is also a werewolf. Elf girl steals the map, there's an elf girl by the way. Chapter 12, they find Rowley's dead grandpa. Chapter 13, as a kid, I would have hated this. Finds the Little Mermaid. Epic cool narwhals save them. Greg wants to quit as Rowley is fed up. Chapter 14, the warlock was Santa the whole time. The wizard was the bad guy the whole time. His mom saves them. Roland is now the king. Greg loves it because it can now be a Christmas book. Doesn't that just sound like a fucking fantastic book? I really don't know what the point in this Rowley spin-off series was. Did kids even like this? Kids watching this for some reason? Did you like this? Am I dumb? So do I have to cover the next Rowley book? Okay. Big Shot has a cool cover. It's one of the rare times I think the texture pattern actually works. And the blue and white work nicely. Also helps it isn't a color we've seen yet. Well done. I'm sure at this rate there's just a hat somewhere filled with various different broad topics that Jeff reaches into for ideas. I guess this time he pulled out the word sports. Yep, a Big Shot is all about sports, who would have guessed? I know I've been using Jeff Kinney as the butt of the joke for the past couple entries now, but I want to make it clear once again that I do not blame him at all for these books feeling as if they've been drastically running out of steam. I don't think there is one man out there who could write 16 books in 16 years, all of which share the exact same characters and exact same formula, without it getting stale at some point. It was bound to happen. And if I'm being honest, keep making the fucking bag, dude. When I talked with him on my podcast, check out my podcast, by the way. I keep bringing it up, but never bothered promoting it, so subscribe to, I suppose. What are you this far in the video for? But he always seems to phrase things like he's aware the series has passed its prime, that it really isn't that popular with the kids of today. At least comparatively to the early 2010s, but fuck me, you wouldn't be able to tell by how prevalent it still is in our society. Greg consistently gets put in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. Anytime a new one comes out, it's advertised everywhere. They got their whole section in fucking bookstores. And there's a reason why you keep getting invited back to the White House for those yearly Easter egg hunts, Jeff. Because Joe Biden reads them to Hunter every night, of course. Because they're still wildly popular, even if that immense success was never going to last forever. And it also must be nice knowing that you're by far one of the most successful authors of our generation. And also a gazillionaire, I saw that office. You know, Jeff, I could buy a lot of Family Guy DVDs with that sort of money. Okay, I should probably start talking about the book now. It's not great. I'll give it to him. Sports is a much more interesting topic than camping again, but Greg is bad at sports and physical activity in general. That is something we have picked up very well from the past dozen entries. So if this book is nothing but showcasing how bad he is at a variety of sports, then I don't even need to finish that sentence. I already know that's exactly what it is. He rants about the Olympics for a while. There's a big field day at school that goes nowhere. I was really expecting that to be the finale, but no, they brush right past it and his three-legged race with Mrs. Epstein? I mean, out of all names, Jeff. The main story highlights Greg joining the school's basketball team with his plans to not get picked feeling. I was not expecting a Wimpy Kid book to unironically follow through all the tropes of your average 90s, early 2000s sports comedy, and sadly I can't tell if the parody is intentional or not. Got all your familiar beats. Greg gets stuck on a team full of losers, but don't fret, there's actually one really good player. Hooray! Then during training, the good player gets injured, so now the team is hopeless. They lose a bunch of matches and have to learn how to work together to make a difference, but it doesn't even matter because right at the final match, the good player comes back to help and send everyone to victory. Okay, it doesn't end exactly that way, but again, all those beats are there. I will admit the ending is pretty funny though, with the opposing team having a player get injured and needing one from the competition to carry on with the match. Susan deciding that Greg should be the one to switch teams because she knows he's so bad that he's going to indirectly help his team win. But miraculously, Greg somehow dunks a basket backwards from halfway across the court, getting lifted in the air by the enemy team and taken out for ice cream as his mum and the rest of the team drive home with no reward. It's like they have a bunch of funny moments planned out, but my biggest problem with Big Shot has to be Greg himself. You may have noticed I stopped bothering to count the worst thing Greg does in each book because he's not even really doing anything anymore. He just kind of reacts to whatever is coming to him, rarely even creating the cringy situations that give you that sense of catharsis, his plan blowing up in his face. This whole book, for the most part, is him simply describing what's happening in front of him. Them wanting each book to take place over a shorter and shorter period of time has resulted in it losing its charm of coming off like a kid's diary, recounting the highlights of his day and having something snarky to add to it all. I appreciated it when they did the opposite in the third wheel, just because it shook things up a bit, and because that was such a major event in Greg's life, you know, his first date. Of course he's gonna remember every painful detail. But a random basketball season? A sport he doesn't even give a shit about? I don't know. Maybe we don't need to hear about every single thing going on. I wonder if he's going to even try to get back into that old formula before we're done with this. There's only 2 real installments left, so it's not looking too good. Either way, I'm at least glad we've only got one more Rowley spinoff left to look at. It really seems like Jeff just did not know what to do with that series. Let's just get this over with. I was not expecting these words to ever come out of my mouth, but Riley Jefferson's Awesome Spooky Stories is a Diary of a Wimpy Kid anthology. They always sneak their goddamn way into my life. There's barely even an intro here, it's just a collection of various different stories slightly related to the universe of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Although it comes off much more like Seth MacFarlane's cavalcade of cartoon comedy, where it's just a bunch of rejected cutaways not good enough for the main show. What's the point in even treating this like it has a plot? Let's just get this over with. All the stories are separated by a title and a fun little card, so Let's just fucking briefly go over all of them. Kid called Rowan is getting bullied at school and hair starts growing all over his body. He's told by his parents that they're all werewolves and now everyone is scared of him. Okay. The prankster. Jasper is the village prankster. I like his smug face. He thinks he turns invisible once everyone starts ignoring him, but it turns out they were all just pranking him. But then it's a double prank because there actually is a meteor coming to hit, but then that was also just a prank. There is no meteor. This guy's killing himself for nothing. Ghost friend. Rusty's friend Gabe dies, who comes back as a ghost to annoy him. It makes him so infuriated, but still keeps him around. It's alright. The biter. There's a kid who bites. It turns out they're a vampire, but they aren't actually a vampires, but the parents are just gonna keep it going. The human head. There's this kid that is only a head who meets the headless horseman and become great friends, but then they start fighting over a girl, and the girl picks the head, which turns the headless horseman into the headless horseman. It makes sense when I wrote it down. The scanner. The airport scanner makes people skeletons, but people don't want to be skeletons because they can't differentiate each other, so they find a way to reverse it. The cellar. A kid hears noises from the cellar in olden times, but he finds out that he actually wasn't living in olden times. His parents just hid him from all technology. It was just a computer downstairs. The nap. Nobody visits this old lady at her home, so she gets this senior SOS device, then fakes a death, has the funeral, is buried and shit, then just calls the senior SOS thing to pick her up to make everyone appreciate her more, but no one really did. They don't care. The stain. This kid lies after dropping an ice cream to his dad and finds the stain on his shirt the next day and starts getting fucking haunted by the dreams of strawberries. See, the stain represents his guilt of lying. A mummy. They bring a mummy back to modern times and it becomes popular and it sues like the ripoff mummies or something. I blinked and this one was done. The science project. This smart kid brings a guy back to life as a zombie, like a Frankenstein, and he doesn't know what to do with him after the project, so he just kind of makes him the pet that he's always wanted, but then he dies of old age, and so the Frankenstein brings him back as his new pet. Cool. The invasion. There's a zombie apocalypse and the people don't know what to do, so they start integrating the zombies into society and it all works fine. And then a bunch of aliens invade and they try to do the same thing, but the aliens just fucking kill them. Finally, we end on the demon, which is actually about Greg and Rowley. Greg comes over for a sleepover and scares Rowley by pretending to be fucking possessed by a demon. Rowley then attacks Greg with pea water, and Greg gets fucking kicked out of the house. Wonderful. Can see why this was Rowley's final book. Good riddance. At first, I was worried that Jeff finally deciding to focus an entire book on Rodrick's band Loaded Diaper was a desperate way of getting fans to try and come back and give the series another chance. But after the last book, fuck it, I'll take it. I mean, you can tell he's at least a little self-aware, even making a little zooey mama jab early on. Cover looks a lot cooler too, even if I think Greg Heffley doing a rock and roll pose like this is the exact opposite of cool. I can't believe how recent this is too. It was 2022, that is insane to think about it. Hey, I'm at least happy he's doing something with Rodrick. I think the last time he was relevant in any serious way was back in book 2. Again, it's strange considering how much of a fan favorite he is, but maybe that contributes to it. He's so rarely seen, so it makes it more special when he finally does. The theme for Diaper Overlode is predictably about fame and fortune, Greg wondering if it's all it's cracked up to be. You sometimes forget that that was Greg's whole goal here with these diaries in the first place. Just because it's about his band doesn't mean I'm all that excited to see that it's simply your average Battle of the Bands storyline. Look, it's Five Nights at Freddy's. Not that I necessarily mind or anything, but around halfway through I did find myself stopping to wonder, why is Greg even talking about this? After that short intro, he's all but absent until the halfway point. Us just learning of Rodrick's various attempts at getting his band's name out there, such as entering a contest to try and win a new van, organizing photo shoots, trying to pull viral marketing stunts to gain popularity through social media. It's all fun, but Greg isn't even here. Why is he recounting this stuff? Obviously, the answer is, it's a kid's book, shut up, does it really matter? Well, I don't know. Kinda. Greg gets taken in to be their roadie at a certain point. After that, they somewhat start gaining traction and getting invited to a bunch of gigs and festivals. But even then, there's nothing really for Greg to even do. He just kind of basks in it all as Rodrick and co continue seeking advice, mainly from one musician who used to be in one of the most successful bands in the world, eventually breaking up and one of their bandmates going missing for the past 25 years. Although it takes Rodrick like half a page to find him, probably should have checked his house. We learn a lot about Greg's brother and his world here. but not a lot of it is very interesting, or at least would be interesting if they did anything with it. For example, way later they establish that there's now a Loaded Diaper ripoff band, but they almost never interact other than their lead singer joining them for the Battle of the Bands. But they brush past it so quickly you can't even really be expected to care. They really do cover a lot of grind in this one, but there is too much going on. Like twerking. Ugh. Like, okay, near the end, Rodrick finds out he's gotten a cease and desist from the creator of this Garbage Peel Kids ripoff. Them also having a character called Loaded Diaper. However, nothing else comes of that until the very last couple pages where during their final performance, everything, yet again, implodes on itself. The crowd finds out that their new lead singer has been lip-syncing, as the cease and desist guy is approaching Rodrick during the show to officially sue him, and Greg gets killed by Purple Guy. Again, I actually would say I liked this one, at least compared to the previous few. But even then, you just can't help but shake the feeling that this well is running dry. This thing is barely even about Greg. Even though this so could have easily had it been about another road trip or something, Rodrick and his band going on tours, we see Greg's POV of exploring the country and working for his brother. They don't really lean into that angle at all, which is what you think it's going to be about based on the fucking blurb. I've noticed there's usually two ways a Wimpy Kid plotline is structured, and it's that they either get right into the plot on page 1 no later, or they decide to start things up at page 102 or some shit. Each method can work, but I can't help but wonder if I would have enjoyed this one more if it got into it faster. Letting us know why Greg is even bothering to talk about this topic. Why would he want to be his brother's roadie? Still, though, I find it interesting that he wants to expand into books about the other characters now. Wonder if Greg is still the narrator, yeah, but more so focusing on the lives of those around him. Maybe someday we'll get the dreaded Manny book. The first novel on planet Earth to sell negative copies. Either way, we're rapidly approaching the end of this adventure. One that I wish I could say was more fun. I started this by reading like one every 2 days or so, but by now it's like fucking 5 a day. Once you get into that kind of groove, you can literally turn your mind off and read through one of these things in 30 minutes and be done. Do that, go to the comments and tell me a single notable thing about the book you just read. Now do that 23 times. Finally, we end on book number 18, 2023's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, No Brainer. This video is a total of 2 hours long, and I still haven't been able to say that fucking title properly. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It's diary that fucking fucks me up. Gotta say, I really like the color. It's actually unique. That cyan looks great with the almost lime green spine. The illustration and texture is fun too. Although ironically, we're ending on the book with the least fun sounding topic. Because this adventure is all about school. You know, when I was in my last year of high school, I couldn't stop telling myself, wow, someday, you know, I'm just gonna wake up and never have to go to school again, and that is gonna be fucking awesome. Every now and then, though, I remember that feeling. Then I look at where my life is now without school, now that I'm on my own, and I can't help but think, I was totally right, school fucking sucks. Especially Greg Heffley's school, with increasing budget cuts, the place is turning into a jungle, with cockroaches, bees, and even a fucking snake constantly roaming the hallways and classrooms. It opens with some classic Greg antics. Him discussing how he wishes you could detach your brain from your head and let it go to school for you. That's the Greg I know and love. We barely even leave the place in No Brainer. Jeff really packed a lot into this one. But unlike Diaper Overlode, where it feels like that's taking away from the story actually progressing, here there really is no central plot. Really reminded me of the tone of the first couple novels. There's a bunch of funny concepts in here too, like to improve grades and therefore raise their budget. The school has started a new High Flyers Club, where if you do well in class you get different perks, like lunch in the teacher's lounge or more leg space. But then they get even more desperate for cash and so introduce the Platinum High Flyers Club, where you get even more rewards for paying a monthly fee of $12.99. They decide to start selling ad space around the lockers and even offer to allow a sponsor to come and change the school's name, and so for a while it officially becomes known as 1-800-DEAD-BUGS Middle School. I'm just listing funny jokes at this point, but I missed that. But also, I'm just now realizing, what the fuck happened to Chirag Gupta? What did they do to him? Holly Hills? Hell, Fregley? Where did they all go? You know, even Rowley barely appears in this one aside from the occasional cameo. This is completely Greg-centric, and honestly, I'm all for it. It perfectly teeters that line between realistic and absurd. Like the idea of Greg becoming principal for a day sounds outlandish, but they make it work. Even more hilarious that he just gets fed up halfway through the day, resigns, and goes home. I wasn't expecting it though, but the school actually doesn't make it. Shutting down and forcing everyone to go their separate ways. Greg being the only one to get sent off to Slacksville. But I find it hilarious that Greg worriedly goes there, only to become the most popular kid in the whole school after finding out everyone there is, a little slow. My guy even gets his first girlfriend. Everything's coming up Heffley. Not all good things can last though, as while tearing down their old school, they managed to find $1 billion fucking dollars. So one of the rare times where they set up something early on that worked for me, the money being hidden under the school somewhere. Maybe it's just because I'm sleep deprived, but I genuinely didn't see that coming. And so with that, the school is reopened and everything gets reset. It's a quick ending, and honestly, I kinda wish they permanently kept Greg at Slacksville, at least for one more book. It comes into play so late, yet offers us such a shake-up to the status quo that, I don't know, I wouldn't have minded more. But whatever, I get it's easier to put a neat little bow on everything by resetting it back to normal, but you're on Bookie at Teen Dude, you can literally do anything you want and people will buy it. Why not return to that focus of having each book connect? They sort of abandoned that in recent times, not sure why. Maybe it's a similar reason as to why we don't see Shrek Gupta anymore. When you make something such a tradition, you know, having to write a book every year while still finding new ways to keep things fresh, you sort of forget about your original vision of the series. You start evolving into a different structure. Tertiary characters get tossed to the wayside in favor of new ones. It's like watching New Simpsons and not having Edna Krabappel as Bart's teacher. The series has just moved on, and maybe dwelling on the past so much isn't all that constructive. Still though, I enjoyed No Brainer a bunch. It was a really refreshing ending and gave me a ton of hope for the future of the franchise. Looks like Jeff hasn't lost his touch quite yet. And with that, it brings us to the end of the Diary of Wimpy Kid franchise. I wish I could have covered the movies too in this video, but I felt like that would have disrupted the pace too much. I kind of like the idea of this being focused solely on the books. And someday in the future, I do want to come back and do that fucking hour-long retrospective on all 3 movies. That is not a lie. I got shit to say. But it's been really interesting finally getting to revisit these books that plagued my childhood so much. I find it interesting how much these connect at first, how they really do all lead into the next, and then at some point that just kind of stops. You don't even really realize it either. It really took me getting to the end of No Brainer to put all that together. But I kind of miss it, I don't know. I can understand both angles where Jeff wouldn't want to do the same thing exactly the same way for fucking 20 years, but a lot of these characters and these aspects of the way it's written made the franchise, you know? And so to abandon all that seems kind of wasteful in my opinion. Like I said way earlier, the Heffley family themselves barely appeared in the first 10 or so books. It really wasn't until Long Haul where they started overusing them over and over again. But all I could really do with them was the same thing. Holidays and vacations and fucking summer camps. I think this series was at its best when they spread out the characters more throughout the books. You know, they had an understanding that not every character had to be involved in every story. And that's what I liked about the ones near the end. They kind of got back into that groove, especially No Brainer. And I'm really glad we ended on that one. So with that, let's get this out of the way. Let's rank all the books. At the very bottom of the list, we've got Old School, then Wrecking Ball, The Deep End, Big Shot, Double Down, The Long Haul, The Getaway, Diaper Overload, The Last Straw, Cabin Fever, The Meltdown, No Brainer, Rodrick Rules, The Ugly Truth, The Third Wheel, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Dog Days, and Hard Luck. I was not expecting Hard Luck to be so high up. Still though, no matter what I have to say and all the jokes I've made, I respect the fuck out of Jeff Kinney. I think that guy's a Chad. These books are imperfect, and I think that's kind of what I like about them, just like the character of Greg Heffley himself. So no matter what I think about the franchise's current state, I hope to see more of them in the future. Because I couldn't picture a world where I walked into a bookstore and didn't see that iconic blank stare.